My name is Julia, and at 35 years old, I experienced the most satisfying moment of my life, followed immediately by the most confusing and infuriating. For 17 long years, I raised my sister, U.S. Sun, as my own flesh and blood. She got pregnant at 16, and our status-obsessed parents decided a teenage pregnancy would completely ruin our family name in their elite social circles. I was 18 at the time, barely an adult, but I stepped up and took him in to protect him. I finalized the sole legal adoption when I was 25. Last month, my estranged sister showed up uninvited to his high school graduation party, carrying a massive custom cake that read, "Congratulations from your real mom." What my son did next shattered her perfect facade completely. But what her wealthy husband screamed at me right after unlocked a decade-long financial deception I never saw coming. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect a child from toxic family members. It was a gorgeous Saturday afternoon in early June, the kind of perfect Seattle day that makes you forget the months of rain. I had spent weeks preparing my backyard for the celebration. String lights zigzagged above the patio, and a local catering company had set up a beautiful spread of gourmet sliders, fresh summer salads, and colorful mocktails. The yard was filled with the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses. My colleagues from the tech firm where I work as a creative director were mingling with neighbors and high school friends. At the center of it all was Leo. He was standing tall and confident in a crisp button-down shirt, smiling as people congratulated him. He had just turned 17 and graduated a year early at the very top of his class. More importantly, he had just received his early acceptance letter to Stanford University. Looking at him, my heart swelled with an overwhelming amount of pride. I had spent my entire adult life working to give him this exact moment. When I took him in, I was a broke college student working double shifts at a local coffee shop while studying late into the night. I cried from pure exhaustion on many occasions, but refused to give up because I needed to afford diapers formula and a safe place for us to sleep. I sacrificed my entire 20s, skipped the parties, and poured every ounce of my energy into building a career, so Leo would never have to worry about his future. I paid for his private schooling, his tutors, his sports equipment, and his college application fees entirely out of my own pocket. We had built a beautiful, quiet life together, completely separate from the toxic circus of my biological family. I tapped my glass with a spoon to get the attention of the crowd. The chatter of 50 guests slowly faded away, and friendly faces turned toward me. I raised my glass of sparkling cider, looking directly at my son. I told him how incredibly proud I was of the man he was becoming. I spoke about his kindness, his brilliant mind, and how his dedication amazed me every single day. I told him that Stanford was incredibly lucky to have him, but that I was the luckiest person in the world to be his mother. Just as the crowd erupted into cheers and warm applause, the heavy wooden gate at the side of my house swung open with a loud, aggressive thud. The joyful applause died almost instantly, replaced by a sudden, heavy silence. Walking down the stone path was my younger sister, Brittany. She was 34, but she was dressed like she was walking a red carpet at a Hollywood premiere. She wore a skin-tight, floor-length designer gown that was entirely inappropriate for a casual backyard graduation party. Her hair was perfectly blown out, and she wore oversized sunglasses despite the dense shade of the patio umbrella. Flanking her was her husband, Preston, a man born into extreme generational wealth who always looked at the world as if it were a speck of dirt on his expensive leather shoes. Behind them trailed my mother, Catherine, clutching a designer handbag and looking frantically around at my guests. I had not spoken to Brittany in years. She had never sent Leo a single birthday card, never attended a parent-teacher conference, and certainly never contributed a single dollar to his upbringing. Yet here she was marching into my home as if she owned the property. She was carrying a massive, expensive-looking bakery box. The guests parted awkwardly to let her through, sensing the immediate shift in the atmosphere. The warmth of the party evaporated, replaced by a thick, suffocating tension. Brittany walked straight up to the main food table, carelessly shoving aside a tray of appetizers to make room. She flipped open the lid of the bakery box and folded the sides down. Inside was a massive tiered cake covered in pristine white fondant and elaborate gold decorations. Written across the top in thick dark icing were the words, "Congratulations from your real mom." Gasps rippled through the crowd of my friends and colleagues. People whispered to each other in absolute shock. Before I could even find my voice to demand that she leave my property, my mother stepped forward. Catherine always had to control the narrative, always had to make sure our family looked completely perfect to outsiders. She looked around at my horrified friends and began to whisper loudly, deliberately, making sure her voice carried across the patio. "Julia was just helping out all these years," my mother announced to my guests, putting on a fake, sympathetic smile. "It was just a sisterly duty because we did not want Brittany to have her youth ruined when she made a tiny mistake at 16. We agreed it was best for everyone if Julia played the mother role temporarily. We had to protect the family reputation, you understand. But now that Leo is going to college, a boy of his pedigree really needs his actual mother to guide him into adulthood." I felt my blood boil. The sheer audacity of her words paralyzed me. She was trying to rewrite history right in front of the child I had raised. She was reducing my 17 years of motherhood, of sleepless nights, of working myself to the bone, into a mere babysitting favor. I took a step forward to throw them out, but Leo beat me to it. He did not yell. He did not throw a tantrum. He walked calmly up to the table and stared down at the expensive cake. He looked at Brittany, who had arranged her face into a perfect camera-ready smile, waiting for him to embrace her. Leo reached out, plunged his bare hand directly into the center of the cake, and ripped out a massive handful of cake and frosting. The pristine gold decorations crumpled. Brittany shrieked in horror as Leo turned, walked over to the large trash can at the edge of the patio, and dropped the handful of cake directly into the garbage. He wiped his hand on a napkin, looked Brittany dead in the eye, and spoke with absolute calm. "My real mom just gave a toast. You are just a guest who needs to leave." Then he turned his back on her and walked into the house, letting the screen door click shut behind him. The silence in the backyard was absolute. Brittany let out a loud, theatrical sob and buried her face in Preston's shoulder, playing the victim perfectly. But Preston did not comfort her. Instead, his face turned bright red with rage. He shoved past my mother, marching directly into my personal space. He pointed a manicured finger right in my face, his voice booming across the quiet yard for every single guest to hear. "I have been depositing $5,000 a month into this kid's account for a decade." Preston screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "I have funded his entire life, and you have brainwashed him against my wife, you ungrateful thief. The college trust is cut off immediately. You will not get another cent from my family." I stood there completely stunned, the words ringing in my ears. $5,000 a month, a college trust. My mind scrambled to process what he was saying. For 10 years, I had balanced budgets, skipped meals, and negotiated salary raises just to make sure Leo had the best opportunities possible. I had never received a penny in child support, nor had I ever asked for it. Preston was glaring at me with absolute disgust, waiting for me to beg for his financial mercy. He had no idea that his furious accusation had just handed me the key to uncovering the most despicable financial fraud my sister had ever committed. The patio cleared out faster than a fire drill in a paper factory. My colleagues, friends, and neighbors, sensing the highly radioactive toxicity radiating from my biological family, murmured quick, awkward excuses and slipped out the side gate. I did not blame them for running. I stayed rooted to the spot on the wooden deck, my mind echoing with Preston's furious words. $5,000 a month, a college trust. The sheer absurdity of his aggressive claim anchored me to the ground. I turned on my heel, took a steadying breath, and marched into the house to face the invasion. Preston was pacing the length of my kitchen island like he owned the property. Brittany was perched on a leather bar stool, dabbing her perfectly dry eyes with a tissue, playing the deeply wounded martyr for her wealthy husband. I walked in and crossed my arms, refusing to offer them a single inch of hospitality. Preston stopped pacing and glared at me. He adjusted the cuffs of his expensive tailored suit and sneered. "You have a lot of nerve, Julia," Preston barked, pointing an accusatory finger at my chest. "After everything my wife has done for that boy, everything I have done for him, I have poured over $600,000 into that kid's life over the last decade. Elite private schooling, soccer camps, college prep courses, you name it. Brittany made sure he had the absolute best of everything money could buy. She made selfless maternal sacrifices from afar, so you could play house without worrying about the bills. And this is how you repay us. You turn him against his own mother just out of petty jealousy. I stared at him in utter silence. He was absolutely serious. Preston genuinely believed every single word coming out of his mouth. He truly thought he had been financing Leo's entire existence. Brittany sniffled loudly, refusing to meet my gaze. She stared intently at the marble countertop, her knuckles turning white as she gripped her designer handbag. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity in my mind. I had paid for Leo's tuition out of my own salary. I had paid for his cleats, his textbooks, his dental bills, and his food. Preston had been writing massive checks, but that money never reached my house. Brittany had been systematically siphoning her husband's vast wealth, using her abandoned son as the ultimate untouchable excuse. Before I could expose her massive lie right then and there, the kitchen door swung violently open. My parents, Harrison and Catherine, marched in with matching expressions of righteous indignation. My father was holding a sleek, dark leather folder. He dropped it onto my kitchen island with a loud, echoing smack that made Brittany jump. "We are putting an end to this ridiculous rebellion right now," Harrison stated. His voice carried the exact same booming, arrogant authority he used to intimidate people at his country club board meetings. "You have had your fun playing Mother Julia. But the game is over. Leo is going to Stanford in the fall. He needs to associate with the right people, and he needs the backing of his actual parents to navigate those high society circles." Catherine stepped forward, her heavy diamond bracelets clinking against her wrists. "We have already arranged everything perfectly," my mother announced with a sickeningly sweet smile. "Preston and Brittany are taking Leo on a month-long European tour to celebrate his high school graduation. Paris, Rome, the Amalfi Coast. It will be the perfect luxury opportunity for them to truly reconnect before university, a proper family vacation to establish their bond. All you have to do is sign the paperwork and get out of the way." My father opened the leather folder and slid a thick stack of legal documents across the granite counter toward me. A heavy silver pen rested on top of the crisp white pages. I looked down at the paper. It was a formal, legally binding relinquishment of my guardianship, transferring all parental rights and decision-making powers back to Brittany. They wanted to erase me completely. They wanted to take the boy I had raised for 17 years, slap a new luxury label on him, and present him to Preston's high society family as Brittany's ultimate maternal achievement. Every protective instinct in my body screamed at me to grab the paperwork and tear it to shreds. I wanted to scream that Brittany was a massive fraud. I wanted to tell Preston he had been scammed out of $500,000 by his own wife. But my years of corporate training kicked in instantly. In my line of work as a creative director handling massive tech accounts, when you encounter a hostile takeover, you do not throw a tantrum. You gather data. You find the opposing side's leverage. If I blew up now, Brittany would just play the victim cry to her husband, and Preston would hire a fleet of ruthless corporate lawyers to bury me in litigation. I needed hard, undeniable financial evidence first. I took a slow, deep breath, forcing my facial muscles to relax into a mask of calm surrender. I looked at the legal paperwork, then looked up at Preston with a perfectly manufactured expression of weary defeat. "I understand," I said quietly, keeping my tone entirely neutral. My mother beamed, clearly thrilled that her problematic daughter was finally falling in line. "But if I am going to sign this and step away from Leo's life, I need to make sure the transition is completely clean," I continued. I looked directly at Preston, holding his arrogant gaze. "You mentioned the monthly deposits you have been sending. I want to make sure I transfer the remaining balance of those specific funds back to you or directly to Brittany. I absolutely do not want to be accused of keeping any of Leo's trust money for myself once the guardianship is transferred." Preston scoffed loudly, clearly enjoying his perceived victory over me. "Keep the change, Julia. Consider it back pay for your decade of babysitting services. We certainly do not need your pocket change." I shook my head, keeping my tone submissive and highly professional. No, I insist on doing this right. I want a completely clean break with zero financial liabilities. Which bank is the Leo Education Fund held at? I need to know exactly where the money was routed so I can balance the ledgers on my end and close out the accounts properly. Brittany suddenly sat up straight on her stool, sheer panic flashing across her perfectly contoured face. That is not necessary, she blurted out quickly. Her voice was uncharacteristically shrill and breathy. Preston, we do not need her to do that. The lawyers can handle the minor details later. Let us just get the signatures today and go home. But Preston held up a hand, silencing his panicking wife. He looked at me with smug satisfaction, eager to flaunt his financial superiority one last time. It is routed through First Sterling Continental. The account ends in 8422. Not that a glorified computer nerd like you would know what to do with a premium wealth management account. Just sign the papers, hand over the boy, and we will handle the real money. First, Sterling Continental. Account ending in 8422. I burned the information deep into my memory. Brittany looked like she was going to be physically sick right there in my kitchen. She knew that I knew, but she also knew she could not say a single word in protest without exposing her massive theft directly to her wealthy husband. I picked up the silver pen, letting it hover over the signature line for a torturous second, then tapped it against the counter. I will need my own legal counsel to review this entire document before I sign away my parental rights, I said calmly. Standard operating procedure. You will have your answer by the end of the week. Preston rolled his eyes heavily, stepping forward to snatch the silver pen back from my hand. Fine. Have your cheap strip mall lawyer look it over. But do not take too long playing games. We have first-class plane tickets to book for my son. He turned to Brittany, his tone softening. Come on, darling. We are done here for today. Let us leave her to pack his things. Preston marched out of the kitchen completely oblivious to the absolute terror radiating from his wife. Brittany scrambled off the bar stool and scurried after him, practically running to escape the room without looking back at me. My mother followed them out loudly, complaining about the heat, the humidity, and the terrible parking situation in my neighborhood. I stayed planted in the center of the kitchen, staring at the closed door. I needed to get up to my home office and start digging into that specific bank account immediately. But before I could take a single step forward, a heavy hand clamped down hard on my shoulder. I spun around. My father Harrison had stayed behind. He backed me into the corner of the kitchen, his tall frame looming over me aggressively. The polite country club grandfather facade was entirely gone. His eyes were cold, calculating, and ruthless. Listen to me very carefully, Julia, Harrison growled, his voice dropping to a menacing, gravelly whisper. You are going to sign those papers by Friday, and you are going to smile for the cameras while you do it. You are going to let Brittany take all the credit for raising that boy, and you are going to fade quietly into the background where you belong. I pushed his hand forcefully off my shoulder. Or what I challenged, refusing to break eye contact or show an ounce of fear. Harrison leaned in closer, his breath hot against my face. If you do not play along, we will destroy you completely. We will file a massive lawsuit for grandparents' rights and bleed your bank accounts dry with legal fees. We will go to the press and ruin your firm's pristine reputation. We will tell everyone that you kidnapped that boy at birth, that you manipulated a vulnerable teenager, and that you kept him hostage out of bitter, barren jealousy. You will lose your career, your money, and your son. Do not test me, Julia. You know I will do it. He turned on his heel and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone in the sudden ringing silence of my home. The sound of my father's heavy footsteps faded down the driveway, followed shortly by the aggressive roar of his luxury sedan speeding away. I stood alone in the absolute stillness of my kitchen, the heavy silence ringing in my ears. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird, but I did not cry. Crying was a luxury for people who were not actively being hunted by their own blood. I locked the deadbolt, pulled the heavy window curtains shut, and walked straight upstairs to my home office. My dual monitors woke up with a soft glow as I sat down in my ergonomic chair. Harrison thought he could bully me into submission because he viewed me as nothing more than a quiet, obedient computer nerd. He fundamentally misunderstood what I did for a living and the power I held. As a creative director at a top-tier tech firm, I did not just design pretty interfaces for consumers. I managed entire ecosystems of digital security data, architecture, and user tracking. More importantly, I had direct access to some of the most brilliant minds in corporate cybersecurity and forensic accounting. I picked up my phone and dialed Nathan. Nathan was the senior forensic auditor for our firm. We had worked closely together on a massive data breach project 2 years ago, and he owed me a major professional favor for catching a tiny coding flaw that saved his department millions of dollars. He answered on the second ring. I skipped the pleasantries entirely. I told him I needed a quiet, highly secure, and extremely thorough financial background check. I gave him the name of the bank, First Continental, and the last 4 digits of the account Preston had so arrogantly shouted in my kitchen. 8422. I explained that I needed to know the exact routing paths, the deposit history, and most importantly, the withdrawal destinations for the past decade. Nathan did not ask any unnecessary questions. He understood the deadly serious tone of my voice. He simply told me to give him 48 hours and hung up the phone. For 2 days, I maintained absolute radio silence. I ignored the barrage of threatening text messages from my father and the passive-aggressive manipulative emails from my mother. I went to work. I cooked dinner for Leo and I waited patiently in the dark. On Wednesday night, a heavily encrypted file dropped into my secure private inbox. Nathan called me immediately after the delivery notification flashed on my screen. His voice sounded remarkably grim. He told me to open the file and look at the fourth tab. I typed in the long decryption key and watched as a massive spreadsheet populated across my screens. Nathan explained that the account was officially registered under the name Leo Education Fund. Preston had indeed been depositing exactly $5,000 on the first of every single month for the last 10 years. Preston was not lying about his generosity. He truly believed he was funding my son's life. But the withdrawal column told a completely different horrifying story. I scrolled down the endless rows of financial data, feeling a cold wave of absolute vindication wash over my entire body. The Leo Education Fund was nothing more than a dummy account. It was a pass-through shell designed for theft. Within 48 hours of Preston depositing the money each month, the exact same amount was systematically transferred out to secondary locations. I clicked on the destination tabs, tracing the money trail. The funds were not going to elite private schools, specialized tutors, or expensive soccer camps. The money was being wired directly into offshore banking apps, high-limit accounts at luxury casinos in Las Vegas and Macau, and direct payment portals for elite designer boutiques across Paris and Milan. Brittany had meticulously siphoned nearly $600,000 of her husband's wealth over a decade. She was not a selfless, grieving mother providing for her child from afar. She was a compulsive gambler and a massive fraud with an uncontrollable luxury shopping addiction. She had used the very existence of the son she abandoned at birth as an untouchable shield to steal $500,000 right from under Preston's nose. Nobody questions a mother asking her wealthy husband for child support. It was the perfect scam. I downloaded every single ledger, every routing number, and every casino receipt. I backed the massive files up to 3 separate secure cloud servers and locked a hard copy on a heavily encrypted flash drive hidden in my safe. I had the ultimate smoking gun. Brittany's entire marriage, her vast wealth, and her pristine high society standing rested on a very fragile house of cards, and I was now holding the match. While I was building my unassailable arsenal in the shadows, my mother was busy waging a vicious war in the public square. My phone started buzzing relentlessly on Thursday afternoon. Friends, neighbors, and colleagues were sending me frantic screenshots from various social media platforms. Catherine had taken her campaign of terror to the internet. She had infiltrated every local community Facebook group, the neighborhood watch pages, the high school parent forums, and the elite country club social boards. Catherine posted a massive, tearful, entirely fabricated essay for the entire city to read. She painted a tragic, heartbreaking picture of her eldest daughter, me, as a bitter, barren spinster who had maliciously manipulated a terrified teenage mother. She wrote that I had essentially kidnapped Leo when Brittany was young and vulnerable, leveraging my age and finances to force my sister out of the picture entirely. According to Catherine's fictional masterpiece, I was now holding Leo hostage out of pure, twisted jealousy. She claimed I was demanding outrageous extortion money to let a graduating high school senior finally see his real loving parents before he left for college. The comments section of her posts was an absolute bloodbath. Hundreds of local parents people who did not know me but absolutely loved a juicy suburban scandal were expressing their fierce outrage. They called me a monster. They praised Brittany for being so incredibly brave and stepping forward after all these years of silent maternal suffering. They offered endless prayers for my poor heartbroken parents who just wanted their family whole again. My phone rang continuously. It was the principal of Leo's high school asking cautiously if everything was all right at home, because several concerned parents had called the administration demanding an investigation. I politely assured him it was a private, highly contested legal matter and ended the call before he could pry further. I sat at my kitchen counter watching my hard-earned reputation being systematically shredded in real time. My mother wanted me to break under the immense social pressure. She wanted me to call her crying, begging her to take the damaging posts down, willing to sign away my son, just to stop the unbearable public humiliation. Instead of crying, I took high-resolution screenshots of every single defamatory post, every blatant lie, and every damaging comment from her wealthy friends. I compiled them into a neat digital folder labeled Defamation Lawsuit. Let them talk. They were just digging their own legal graves deeper with every keystroke. The digital attacks I could handle. The social isolation and neighborhood gossip I could weather with my head held high. But my cold, calculated corporate restraint shattered completely into a million pieces at exactly 6:30 that evening. Leo had picked up a summer job working at a local tech repair shop a few miles away from our house. He usually biked home bursting through the front door with high energy and a funny story about a broken motherboard or a difficult, demanding customer. The heavy oak front door opened very slowly. There was no energetic greeting calling out my name. No loud dropping of his heavy canvas backpack on the entryway bench. I walked out of the kitchen to greet him and stopped dead in my tracks. My digital tablet slipped from my suddenly numb fingers, hitting the hardwood floor with a loud, sharp crack. Leo was standing in the dim light of the entryway. His favorite button-down shirt was torn violently at the collar, the fabric hanging by a thread. He was holding a bag of frozen peas tightly against the side of his face. When he slowly lowered it, I saw a massive, angry purple bruise blooming across his sharp cheekbone and swelling rapidly toward his left eye. His knuckles were scraped raw, and his broad shoulders were shaking with leftover adrenaline. I rushed forward, my hands hovering over his injured face, my heart dropping straight into my stomach. I demanded to know who did this to him. Leo swallowed hard, his voice trembling with a potent mixture of residual fear and blazing teenage rage. He told me that as he was leaving the repair shop and unlocking his bike, a heavily tinted black SUV pulled up, blocking his exit from the alleyway. Two massive men in dark tailored suits stepped out. They cornered him in the empty back parking lot where there were no security cameras. They shoved him hard against the rough brick wall of the building, tearing his shirt and striking his face when he tried to push past them. They did not want his wallet, his phone, or his bike. They shoved a heavy clipboard against his chest and tried to physically force a pen into his hand. They told him he was going to sign a legal affidavit acknowledging that Brittany was his primary financial provider and his real mother, or things would get significantly much worse for him and for me. Preston had sent his private, highly paid corporate security detail to physically intimidate a high school student. Leo fought back fiercely, kicking one of the men hard in the shin and throwing an elbow into the other man's ribs. He managed to sprint away through a narrow pedestrian alleyway, leaving his bike behind and running the entire 3 miles home. I pulled my towering son into a fierce, desperately protective embrace, feeling his rapid heartbeat thumping against my chest. The strategic, calculating corporate director inside me died permanently in that exact moment, replaced entirely by pure, unadulterated maternal fury. They had laid their hands on my child. The strategic game was over, and I was going to burn their entire world to ash. I spent the entire night holding ice packs to Leo's bruised face, my heart breaking every time he winced. Once he finally fell asleep, I went to work securing our lives. I hired a private, highly vetted security team to guard my property and shadow Leo wherever he went. Nobody was going to touch my son again without going through a wall of trained professionals. By the time the sun rose over the Seattle skyline, my maternal panic had hardened into a cold, calculated strategy. I put on my sharpest tailored suit, drove to my corporate headquarters, and prepared for war. My corner office sits on the 40th floor, encased in soundproof glass with a commanding view of the city. I was reviewing the offshore casino routing numbers Nathan had decrypted for me when the heavy glass doors to my executive suite swung violently open. My assistant protested loudly from the hallway, but she was entirely ignored. Harrison, Catherine, and Brittany marched into my office as if they owned the entire tech firm. Following closely behind them was a man in a flashy, cheap suit, carrying a bulky leather briefcase. He had the unmistakable aura of a sleazy, high-volume intimidation lawyer. Harrison had always used his aggressive country club entitlement to bypass rules. He likely bullied his way past the lobby security guards by dropping names of wealthy board members he golfed with. I signaled to my frantic assistant that it was fine and pressed a button under my desk to lock the doors and activate the privacy frosting on the glass walls. The transparent walls instantly turned opaque white, sealing the five of us inside a soundproof box. "Sit down," Julia Harrison ordered, pointing at one of my own guest chairs. I remained standing behind my massive desk. I kept my posture perfectly straight and my expression completely neutral. I told him he had exactly 5 minutes before I called corporate security to have him escorted out in handcuffs for trespassing. Brittany scoffed, crossing her arms. She wore a dramatic, oversized pair of designer sunglasses indoors, likely to hide the stress lines forming around her eyes. She looked absolutely exhausted, the weight of her massive financial fraud clearly taking a toll on her pristine image. The lawyer stepped forward, dropping his heavy briefcase onto my pristine glass desk. He did not bother to introduce himself. He simply popped the latches, pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, and slapped them down right in front of me. On top of the crisp white pages was a cashier's check. My parents flanked the lawyer, looking incredibly smug. Catherine smoothed down her tailored skirt and offered me a condescending, pitiful smile. "We are giving you an easy way out," my mother announced. "We know you do not have the resources to fight Preston's family in court. So we are offering you a very generous settlement to walk away quietly and let Brittany step into her rightful place." I looked down at the cashier's check. It was made out for $50,000. The lawyer leaned over my desk, planting his hands firmly on the glass to intimidate me. "The terms are simple," he stated. "You sign the non-disclosure agreement. You relinquish all legal guardianship of the boy. You agree to post a public statement on your social media accounts, apologizing for alienating the child from his true mother. You will explicitly state that Brittany has been the sole financial and emotional force behind his successful upbringing and his acceptance into Stanford. If you do this, you get to walk away with $50,000. I stared at the check, genuinely amazed by their absolute delusion. "And if I refuse?" I asked softly. Harrison slammed his fist against the wall. "If you refuse, we will drag you through a legal hell you cannot even begin to comprehend. We will file injunction after injunction. We will tie up your bank accounts. Preston's family has a team of ruthless litigators on retainer. They will bury you in paperwork until you are entirely bankrupt. You will lose your house, your career, and the boy. Take the money, Julia. It is more than a low-level computer worker like you will see in a year." I did not touch the check. Instead, I let a long, uncomfortable silence stretch across the room. I looked at Brittany. She was chewing her bottom lip nervously, her eyes darting between the check and my face. She desperately needed me to take the money. She needed this fake narrative to appease Preston so he would not look too closely at the missing $600,000 she had already embezzled. But Harrison's arrogant threat triggered a crucial question in my mind. Preston had already cut off the fake education fund. He thought he was already paying for Leo. Why the sudden desperate rush to force a public legal transfer of guardianship right now? Why not just walk away? I picked up the check and held it between two fingers. Why the sudden urgency, Harrison? You ignored Leo for 17 years. Preston thought he was paying for him from afar. What changed this week to make you barge into my office with a bribe? Harrison sneered, unable to suppress his massive ego. He always loved to brag about wealth, even wealth that did not belong to him. He could never resist an opportunity to make someone else feel small. You really have no idea how the real world works, do you? Harrison mocked. Preston's grandfather established an ironclad generational trust fund. It is worth tens of millions of dollars. The trust automatically unlocks a massive payout for the next generation when the primary heir turns 18 and matriculates into a top-tier university. Catherine nodded proudly, taking over the explanation. Leo turning 18 and going to Stanford triggers the payout for Preston and Brittany. But the trust executors require absolute proof that Brittany and Preston are the active guiding parents of the heir. If there is a custody dispute, or if the boy refuses to acknowledge them, the board will freeze the payout. We need this paperwork signed today to present to the trust executors before the charity gala this weekend. The final puzzle piece slammed into place. Brittany was not just trying to play mother for the social status. She was desperately racing against a ticking clock. She had gambled and shopped away $500,000 of Preston's money. If she did not unlock that massive generational trust fund this weekend, she would have no way to replace the stolen money before Preston's accountants noticed the missing funds. She needed me to sign away my son so she could secure her multi-million-dollar payday and save herself from federal embezzlement charges. I looked at my parents, who were practically vibrating with greed. They wanted that trust fund money just as much as Brittany did. They wanted the social prestige of unlocking the family fortune. I let out a laugh. It started as a small chuckle and grew into a loud, genuine, echoing laugh that bounced off the glass walls of my office. The sleazy lawyer frowned, clearly confused by my reaction. Brittany took a step back, her manufactured confidence wavering. "You think this is funny?" Harrison growled, his face turning an angry shade of red. "I think it is hilarious," I replied. I slowly slid the $50,000 check and the non-disclosure agreement back across the glass desk. I pushed it right into the lawyer's chest. I reached over to my massive dual monitors. I typed in my master decryption password and pulled up my personal investment portfolio. I turned the large screens around so they faced the four of them directly. "You walked into my office and called me a low-level computer worker," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "You threatened to bankrupt me. You offered me $50,000 to sell my son to a fraud." I pointed at the bottom line of my portfolio. The numbers glowed brightly on the screen. My diversified stock options, my commercial real estate holdings, and the licensing fees for the digital patents I had authored over the last decade. "I make $50,000 in a single week," I stated coldly. "I could buy and sell your entire country club lifestyle 10 times over, Harrison. You have no concept of who I am or what I have built while you were busy worshipping a daughter who steals from her own husband." The lawyer choked on a gasp, his eyes widening as he read the 8-figure sum on my screen. He immediately realized he had walked into a room heavily outgunned. Harrison and Catherine stared at the monitors in absolute paralyzing shock. The narrative they had built in their heads, that I was a poor, struggling spinster, instantly vaporized. Brittany, however, refused to accept reality. She ripped off her oversized sunglasses, her eyes blazing with desperate, cornered panic. "You are just a glorified computer nerd," Brittany sneered, her voice cracking with pure venom. "Smoke and mirrors. You cannot beat Preston's real wealth. You cannot beat his family's lawyers. We will take that boy from you and we will leave you with absolutely nothing." I did not argue with her. Arguing with a desperate, cornered animal was a waste of breath. I simply smiled. It was a cold, sharp, predatory smile. I picked up my cell phone from the desk. I opened my messages and pulled up my chat with Leo. He was safe at home, flanked by the security detail I had hired. I typed 2 simple words and hit send. Phase 1. I looked back up at the 4 intruders standing in my office. "You have exactly 30 seconds to get out of my building before I have security drag you out by your hair. And tell Preston I look forward to seeing him at the gala." The heavy glass doors slid shut, sealing the absolute silence of my office once more. I watched the four of them retreat down the hallway, their aggressive posturing replaced by frantic, hushed arguments. Brittany was aggressively chewing on her thumbnail, practically vibrating with nervous energy. My mother was trying to soothe her while my father and the sleazy lawyer stalked toward the elevators in defeat. They thought they were the predators in this scenario. They had absolutely no idea they were already caught in a trap I had set the moment I received Leo's text message earlier that morning. Across town, Phase 1 was actively unfolding inside a busy independent coffee shop just 3 blocks from Leo's high school. Leo was sitting at his usual corner table by the window, a half-finished iced latte sweating onto the coaster next to his open laptop. He looked like any other ordinary teenager studying for summer placement exams. But Leo was not ordinary. He had been raised by a woman who spent her entire career mapping out digital behavior, anticipating corporate sabotage, and building impenetrable security walls. He knew how to read a room, and he knew exactly how to handle a hostile actor. Sitting 2 tables away, dressed in casual civilian clothes, was the private security contractor I had hired the night before. He was drinking a black coffee and reading a newspaper, completely invisible to the untrained eye but perfectly positioned to intervene if anyone tried to physically intimidate my son again. The bell above the cafe door chimed loudly. Brittany marched inside, bringing a cloud of expensive perfume and frantic desperation with her. She scanned the crowded room, her eyes darting over the college students and remote workers, until she locked onto Leo in the corner. She did not approach him with the warmth of a mother trying to reconnect. She marched over with the aggressive transactional energy of a high-stakes gambler placing her final bet on a roulette table. Leo did not look up from his laptop until Brittany slammed a heavy object directly onto the wooden table. It hit the surface with a sharp metallic clatter. Leo slowly lowered his screen. Resting next to his iced latte was a sleek black leather keychain bearing the unmistakable gold crest of a Porsche. Brittany slid into the chair across from him. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, trying to force a conspiratorial, friendly smile. The smile did not reach her eyes. Her eyes were completely hollow, filled with the sheer terror of a woman who knew her offshore bank accounts were about to be exposed to her billionaire husband. "It is a 911 Carrera?" Brittany whispered, tapping her manicured fingernail against the leather keychain. "Brand new. The dealership is detailing it right now. It is black on black, exactly the kind of car a kid going to Stanford should be driving. It is yours, Leo. Fully paid off. All you have to do is take the keys." Leo looked at the keys, then looked back up at the woman who had abandoned him at birth. He did not yell. He did not throw the keys back in her face. He channeled every ounce of the strategic restraint I had taught him. He sat back in his chair, crossed his arms, and played the role of a naive, greedy teenager who could be bought for the right price. Before Brittany had even walked into the cafe, Leo had opened the voice memo app on his phone, hit record, and placed the device face down on the table right next to his coffee cup. In our state, the law requires only one-party consent to record a conversation. As long as Leo was part of the interaction, every single word Brittany said was perfectly legal to capture and use. "Why are you giving me a car?" Leo asked, keeping his voice carefully skeptical, like a teenager weighing a suspicious deal. "You have not spoken to me in 17 years. Now you just drop a sports car on my table. What is the catch?" Brittany let out a forced, breathy laugh, waving her hand dismissively, as if 17 years of abandonment was just a minor scheduling conflict. "There is no catch, sweetie," Brittany lied, leaning in closer. "Preston and I just want to celebrate your graduation properly. We know Julia has tried her best, but she does not have the resources to give you the lifestyle you truly deserve. We want to make up for lost time. We want to be a real family." Leo stared at her, letting the silence stretch out, making her sweat. "I do not need a car to be a family," Leo replied smoothly. "If you wanted to be a family, you would have come to my soccer games. You would have helped me with my college applications. Julia did all of that. You just showed up with a cake and threw a tantrum." Brittany flinched, her fake smile cracking at the edges. Her patience was wearing razor thin, her desperation bubbling right to the surface. She glanced around the cafe, making sure no one was eavesdropping on their conversation. "Listen to me, Leo," Brittany urged, her voice dropping to a harsh, urgent whisper. "Julia is just a bitter woman who wants to keep you locked away in her boring, middle-class life. Preston and I can give you the world, but we need you to do one tiny, simple favor for us this weekend. That is all. One favor, and the car is yours forever. No takebacks, no conditions." Leo leaned forward, perfectly baiting the trap. "What kind of favor?" "Preston's company is hosting their annual family charity gala this Saturday night." Brittany explained rapidly, her words spilling out in a frantic rush. "It is a massive event. All of Preston's relatives will be there, including his grandfather. I just need you to put on a nice suit, come to the gala, and stand on the stage with me and Preston." "And do what Leo asked," his tone perfectly flat. "Just read a very short speech," Brittany pleaded. "I will write the whole thing for you. You do not even have to memorize it. You just have to hold the microphone, look at Preston's grandfather, and call me Mom. You just have to tell the crowd how much you love me, how I have always been there for you, and how I funded your entire life from behind the scenes." Leo picked up the Porsche keys, turning the heavy metal over in his hand. He looked at the keys, pretending to be swayed by the luxury bribe. "Why does it matter what I say to Preston's grandfather? Why do I have to lie in front of all those wealthy people? What do you actually get out of this?" Brittany slammed her hand flat against the table, completely losing her temper. Her mask of maternal affection shattered into a million jagged pieces. She was no longer pretending to care about her son. She was a desperate criminal trying to secure her payout. "I do not care about the last 17 years. Leo, Brittany hissed viciously. Leaning so far forward she was practically spitting the words at him. "Just read the script at the gala so Preston's family releases the trust money. If you do not play your part, the trust stays frozen and I get absolutely nothing. Do the speech, take the car, and you never have to see me again. I will let you keep the car. Just do not ruin my payout." Leo stopped, turning the keys in his hand. He looked at Brittany with a mixture of absolute pity and profound disgust. He had exactly what we needed. He set the Porsche keys gently back down on the wooden table and slid them across the surface until they bumped against Brittany's designer handbag. "I do not want your car," Leo said, his voice ringing with quiet, devastating authority. "And I am definitely not your son." He picked up his laptop, grabbed his phone, and stood up from the table. He did not look back as he walked out of the coffee shop, leaving Brittany sitting alone with her useless bribe and her rapidly collapsing house of cards. The security contractor stood up quietly, tossed his newspaper into the recycling bin, and followed Leo out to ensure he got into his ride safely. 30 minutes later, Leo walked into my corporate office. He bypassed my assistant, walked straight up to my glass desk, and set his phone down. He pressed play on the audio file. I listened to the recording in absolute silence. The audio quality was pristine. Brittany's voice came through the speakers with crystal clear, vicious clarity. "I do not care about the last 17 years, Leo. Just read the script at the gala so Preston's family releases the trust money. I will let you keep the car." I reached out and stopped the recording. I looked up at my son. He was smiling a sharp, brilliant smile that perfectly mirrored my own. We had the ultimate weapon. We did not need to go to the police and file a tedious report about extortion. We did not need to fight a lengthy, exhausting court battle against Preston's highly paid corporate lawyers. We had the exact tool we needed to destroy Brittany's entire facade on her own chosen battlefield. "We are going to that gala," I told Leo, pulling up the digital calendar on my desktop. "Where is Preston hosting this corporate event?" Leo pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. It was the script Brittany had tried to hand him before he walked out. Printed at the very top of the page was the venue location. "It is at the Crestwood Country Club," Leo read aloud. "The big ballroom." A slow, dangerous laugh escaped my lips. The Crestwood Country Club. It was the absolute epicenter of high society in our city. It was the exact place where my parents Harrison and Catherine spent every single weekend drinking expensive scotch and bragging to their elite social circle about their pristine, flawless family. Their entire social standing, their business networking, and their arrogant pride rested entirely on their exclusive membership at Crestwood. They treated that country club like their own personal kingdom, looking down on anyone who could not afford the outrageous initiation fees. They had absolutely no idea. They had been so busy plotting to steal my son, so busy trying to force me to sign away my parental rights that they had completely ignored my actual professional life. They still thought I was just a low-level computer worker scraping by in the suburbs. They did not know that my investment portfolio had expanded massively over the last quarter. They did not know that my wealth management firm had aggressively diversified my assets into commercial real estate. And they certainly had absolutely no idea that just 3 weeks ago, I had finalized the quiet, highly confidential purchase of the commercial real estate conglomerate that owned the land beneath the Crestwood Country Club. I was not just a guest at their exclusive club. I was their landlord. I looked at Leo, feeling a rush of absolute untouchable power coursing through my veins. "We are going to need to buy you a custom-tailored tuxedo," I told my son, standing up from my desk and grabbing my coat. "We are going to attend a charity gala, and we are going to deliver the exact performance my sister requested." Before we could finalize Leo's tuxedo measurements for the gala, I had another pressing issue to handle. My mother was still actively attempting to destroy my life on the internet. Catherine had spent the last 48 hours treating local Facebook community groups like her own personal diary, spinning a massive fabricated web of lies about my barren jealousy and my supposed kidnapping of my sister's child. She wanted me to break under the immense weight of social ostracization. She expected me to call her in a panic, crying and begging for mercy, willing to trade my son's guardianship just to make the digital harassment stop. She severely underestimated how a corporate executive handles a smear campaign. I did not log online to argue with bored suburban housewives in the comments section. I did not post a tearful defense video. I let my lawyers do the talking. Every Thursday at 2 in the afternoon, Catherine hosted the Crestwood Elite Women's Literature Society on the sprawling back patio of my parents' luxury estate. It was not a real book club. It was a weekly excuse for Seattle's wealthiest, most idle socialites to drink expensive Chardonnay, ignore whatever best-selling novel they were supposed to have read, and gossip viciously about their neighbors. It was my mother's most highly prized social audience. According to the detailed report I received later that afternoon, Catherine was right in the middle of a theatrical, tearful monologue about her profound maternal grief. She was holding court, dabbing her dry eyes with a monogrammed napkin, telling women named Meredith and Patricia about how I had cruelly manipulated her vulnerable daughter Brittany all those years ago. She was actively weaving her fictional tale of woe when the heavy iron gate to her garden swung open. A man in a sharp gray suit walked directly onto the patio. He bypassed the catered sandwich spread and marched straight up to my mother. The entire book club fell completely silent, their wine glasses hovering halfway to their mouths. Catherine stood up, her face flushing with indignation at the intrusion. She demanded to know how he got past the neighborhood security gate. The man did not answer her question. He simply asked her to confirm her legal name. When she angrily verified that she was indeed Catherine, the man pulled a massive, incredibly thick stack of legal documents from his leather satchel. He dropped the heavy stack directly onto the glass patio table right on top of her unread books. "You have been officially served the process server," announced his voice, carrying clearly across the quiet garden for every single one of her wealthy friends to hear. The documents were not just a simple warning. My legal team had drafted a devastating ironclad cease and desist order, accompanied by a formal notice of intent to sue for gross defamation, libel, and tortious interference with my professional business. The paperwork included high-resolution time-stamped screenshots of every single lie she had posted online over the past week. It demanded an immediate public retraction of all statements and threatened financial damages in the millions if she did not comply within 24 hours. Catherine stared at the towering stack of legal threats in absolute horror. Her wealthy friends exchanged wide-eyed, scandalized looks. My mother tried to laugh it off, attempting to tell the group that it was just a silly misunderstanding by her troubled daughter, but the damage was already permanently done. The process server turned on his heel and walked away, leaving Catherine to face the humiliated, judgmental stares of the exact society women she had been trying to impress. When Harrison came home from the country club later that evening and found his wife having a complete meltdown over the defamation lawsuit, he absolutely lost his mind. Harrison was a man who operated entirely on ego and intimidation. He could not stand the fact that the quiet, obedient daughter he had bullied for decades was suddenly fighting back with massive legal force. He decided that if I was going to use lawyers, he was going to use the police. Harrison formulated a desperate, reckless plan to paralyze me before the weekend charity gala. He drove directly to the downtown precinct of the Seattle Police Department and demanded to speak to a senior detective. Harrison filed a formal sworn police report claiming that I had orchestrated a massive premeditated theft. He told the police that 17 years ago, when I left their house, I had stolen a safe full of priceless, untraceable family heirlooms, antique diamond jewelry, rare bearer bonds, and gold assets. Harrison spun a wild, desperate lie to the detective. He claimed that I had secretly fenced those stolen family assets to fund my lavish, secretive lifestyle and to build the initial capital for my tech career. He demanded that the police immediately freeze all of my personal bank accounts, my corporate assets, and my investment portfolios pending a full criminal investigation. He argued that I was a massive flight risk who was holding his grandson hostage with stolen wealth. Harrison thought this aggressive legal strike would completely financially paralyze me, forcing me to surrender Leo just to get the criminal charges dropped. I was sitting in my corporate boardroom finalizing a software licensing deal when my assistant interrupted to tell me a Detective Miller was on the line. I took the call calmly. The detective informed me that I was the subject of a serious grand larceny investigation and requested that I come down to the precinct immediately to answer questions about stolen family assets. I did not panic. I did not cry. I smiled. Harrison had just handed me the shovel to dig his own grave. I called the senior litigation partner at my firm's retained legal counsel. I told him we were going for a ride. 30 minutes later, I walked through the double doors of the downtown police precinct. I was not alone. I was flanked by two of the most ruthless, highly paid corporate defense attorneys on the West Coast. Harrison was sitting on a hard plastic chair in the precinct lobby, sipping a bad cup of waiting room coffee. When he saw me walk through the doors, a smug, victorious grin spread across his face. He truly believed he had won. He thought the police were going to slap cuffs on me right then and there. I did not even look at him. I walked straight past him and followed Detective Miller into a private interrogation room. The detective started to recite the allegations Harrison had made, explaining the severity of grand larceny and the claim that my entire financial foundation was built on stolen diamonds and bearer bonds. My lead attorney held up a single hand, stopping the detective mid-sentence. He unzipped a heavy briefcase and dumped a mountain of pristine certified financial documents onto the metal table. We presented my complete tax returns for the last 10 years. We provided the exact audited capital origin records for my tech firm. We showed the certified payroll deposits from my early 20s when I was working double shifts at a coffee shop just to feed Leo. We presented the digital patent filings that generated my first $1 million, complete with the corporate checks issued directly from major Silicon Valley tech giants. We laid out my entire unassailable investment portfolio, showing the exact legal origin of every single dollar I had ever earned, saved, and invested. Detective Miller spent 20 minutes meticulously reviewing the certified financial records. The narrative of the stolen family diamonds evaporated into thin air. He looked at the paperwork proving I made $50,000 a week in legitimate software licensing alone. He realized very quickly that he was not dealing with a desperate thieving daughter. He was dealing with a highly successful corporate executive who was being maliciously targeted by a vindictive, lying father. The detective gathered the paperwork, his face tightening with intense professional anger. He thanked me for my profound cooperation and asked me to wait in the room for just a moment. Through the glass window of the interrogation room, I watched Detective Miller march out into the crowded precinct lobby. He walked directly up to Harrison. My father stood up, expecting to hear that my accounts had been officially frozen. Instead, Detective Miller raised his voice, ensuring that every police officer, desk clerk, and civilian in the busy lobby could hear him clearly. The detective verbally shredded my father. He informed Harrison that filing a false police report in an attempt to weaponize the justice system for a personal family dispute was a severe criminal offense. He told Harrison that the financial records proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that I had earned every single penny through legitimate corporate channels. Detective Miller pointed a stern finger at my father's chest and stated that if Harrison ever stepped foot inside that precinct again to waste police resources with fabricated malicious lies, Harrison would be the one leaving in handcuffs. Harrison's face turned a violent, splotchy shade of purple. He looked around the crowded lobby. Dozens of people were staring at him with absolute disgust. The wealthy, arrogant country club patriarch was being publicly dressed down like a common criminal. He stuttered, trying to backpedal, trying to claim there must have been some kind of misunderstanding, but the detective simply turned his back and walked away. Harrison grabbed his coat and fled the precinct, utterly humiliated and completely defeated. I walked out of the precinct a few minutes later, thanking my lawyers for their swift work. The air outside felt crisp and clean. Harrison had fired his absolute best shot, and it had bounced off my armor without leaving a single scratch. My assets were completely secure. My reputation was flawless. The path to the charity gala was wide open. I unlocked my car and slid into the driver's seat. Before I could even start the engine, my cell phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. I had one new urgent voicemail. The caller ID displayed a number I did not have saved, but the automated transcript on my screen immediately caught my attention. I pressed play and held the phone to my ear. It was Preston. His usual arrogant, booming country club voice was entirely gone. He sounded tense, calculated, and deeply suspicious. Julia, Preston said, his voice dropping low as if he was making the call from a secure, private location. "Do not tell Brittany or your parents that I am calling you. We need to have a private meeting. Just you and me. Today." Brittany's stories about the education fund and her timeline of events are not adding up, and my personal accountants are starting to ask questions I cannot answer. Name the time and the place. I will be there. I slowly lowered the phone, a sharp, victorious smile spreading across my face. The cracks in Brittany's massive, fraudulent house of cards were finally beginning to splinter. Preston was waking up, and he was coming directly to me for the truth. Phase 2 was officially initiating. I replied to Preston's voicemail with a single text message containing an address and a time. The location was an ultra-exclusive French restaurant downtown, known for its aggressively dark lighting, private mahogany booths, and absolute discretion. I chose it specifically because it was not a place where my parents or their wealthy country club friends usually gathered. It was a restaurant designed for corporate sharks to conduct hostile negotiations away from prying eyes. I arrived 20 minutes early. I wore a pristine white blazer and ordered a sparkling water with a twist of lemon. I needed my mind entirely sharp. At exactly 2 o'clock, Preston walked through the heavy brass doors. He did not look like the arrogant, untouchable billionaire who had screamed in my kitchen just days ago. He looked like a man who had not slept. His tie was slightly crooked, and his eyes darted around the dimly lit dining room before locking onto my booth. He slid into the leather seat across from me and immediately flagged down a waiter to order a double scotch. He did not offer any pleasantries. He leaned across the polished wood table, keeping his voice low and tight. He demanded to know what game I was playing. He told me his accountants had flagged several massive discrepancies in his personal ledgers regarding the education fund, and Brittany had been entirely unable to provide any tuition receipts or tax documentation for the past decade. She had claimed the private school preferred direct wire transfers to an administrative account to protect Leo's privacy. I took a slow sip of my water, letting the silence stretch. I watched the absolute dread swimming in his eyes. Preston was not a stupid man when it came to finances. He was a ruthless corporate executive who managed billions. His only blind spot was the woman he had married. He had trusted her completely, and now that trust was violently fracturing. "I am not playing any games, Preston," I said calmly. "I am simply existing in reality. A reality you are finally starting to wake up to. He gritted his teeth, his hands curling into tight fists on the table. He stubbornly doubled down, desperately trying to protect his own ego. He could not admit he had been conned. He insisted that Brittany was a devoted mother. He claimed she had made countless selfless maternal sacrifices from afar, enduring the pain of separation just to ensure Leo had a successful life. He praised her for quietly enduring my supposed hostility and control over the boy. I let him talk. I let him recite the entire fictional narrative Brittany had fed him for years. When he finally ran out of breath and took a large gulp of his scotch, I leaned forward. I did not bring a single piece of paper with me. I did not bring the decrypted financial ledgers or the casino receipts. Handing him the evidence right now would ruin the massive public execution I had planned for the charity gala. I needed maximum impact. I needed him to discover the truth with his own two eyes so he could never accuse me of fabricating the documents. If Brittany is such a devoted mother, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level, then you should have absolutely no problem verifying her maternal sacrifices. You have the banking app on your phone right now. Open it. Pull up the withdrawal history for the Leo Education Fund. Preston scoffed, shaking his head defensively. He claimed his accountants were already handling the audit, and he did not need to take financial advice from a resentful sister. I smiled, a sharp, cold expression that made him flinch. I am not giving you financial advice, Preston. I am giving you a reality check. You think you have been paying for elite private high schools and specialized tutors. But tell me, do elite high schools typically process their tuition payments through the Bellagio Casino in Las Vegas? Do high school soccer camps require monthly wire transfers to luxury designer boutiques in Milan and Paris? The color completely drained from Preston's face. He stared at me in absolute horror. He opened his mouth to argue, to call me a liar, but the words died in his throat. The undeniable logic of my questions hit him like a physical blow. He slowly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his cell phone. His hands were shaking so badly, he struggled to unlock the screen. Before he could open his banking application, the heavy oak doors of the restaurant flew open with a violent crash. Brittany stormed into the dining room like a hurricane of sheer panic. She must have tracked Preston's phone location when he left their estate. Her perfectly styled hair was a mess, and her designer coat was thrown haphazardly over her shoulders. She scanned the dark booths frantically until she spotted us. When she saw Preston sitting across from me, her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. She marched directly toward our booth, her high heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood floor. She did not care that she was in a quiet, exclusive restaurant. She did not care about social decorum. She only cared about stopping Preston from looking at his phone. "Preston, what are you doing here?" Brittany shrieked, grabbing his arm and trying to physically yank him out of the booth. "You are supposed to be at the office. Why are you sitting with her?" Preston looked up at his wife, his expression a chaotic mixture of confusion and dawning realization. He held up his phone. "Julia was just telling me about the education fund," he said slowly. "She suggested I look at the withdrawal locations." Brittany let out a loud, theatrical gasp. She completely ignored his question and immediately pivoted to the most insane, desperate distraction tactic she could muster. She snatched the full glass of red wine from the table next to us. Without a single second of hesitation, she hurled the dark liquid directly at me. The cold wine splashed across my face and soaked into my pristine white blazer, staining the fabric a deep, violent crimson. I did not flinch. I did not scream. I slowly reached for a linen napkin and wiped the wine from my eyes, maintaining absolute terrifying eye contact with my sister. "She is obsessed with you!" Brittany screamed at the top of her lungs, pointing a shaking finger at my ruined jacket. "She has always been jealous of my life. She kidnapped my baby, and now she is trying to seduce my husband. Preston, she is trying to destroy our marriage because she is a bitter, lonely woman who cannot get a man of her own." The entire restaurant had fallen dead silent. Waiters stopped in their tracks. Wealthy patrons stared at us with wide eyes, horrified by the massive public spectacle. Preston looked completely mortified. For a man obsessed with his high society reputation, a screaming match in a luxury restaurant was his ultimate nightmare. Brittany grabbed his jacket lapels, crying real tears of absolute panic. "Please, Preston, we have to leave. She is lying to you. She is trying to ruin us. You cannot listen to a single word she says. Take me home right now." Preston looked at me, his eyes dropping to the wine dripping off my chin. He looked back at his frantic, screaming wife. The public embarrassment overrode his need for answers. He shoved his phone back into his pocket, threw a $100 bill onto the table, and let Brittany drag him toward the exit. She kept a death grip on his arm, rushing him out the doors before he could ask another question. I sat alone in the booth, completely unfazed by the dramatic exit. I wiped the last drops of wine from my cheek. Brittany thought she had successfully stopped him from seeing the truth. She was too arrogant to realize that her explosive, panicked reaction had just given Preston all the confirmation he needed. I had successfully planted the seed of absolute doubt. By the time the charity gala arrived, that seed would grow into a massive, undeniable reckoning. I stood up, smoothed down my ruined blazer, and walked out of the restaurant with my head held high. I drove home, took a hot shower, and threw the stained jacket into the trash. When Leo came home from his secure study session, I gave him a brief update on the successful psychological warfare. We reviewed our timeline for the gala, ensuring every digital file was perfectly prepped for the AV team at the country club. The trap was set, and the prey was walking directly into it. I went to sleep that night feeling a profound sense of calm. I had outmaneuvered every single attack my family had launched. I was ready for the weekend. But Harrison and Catherine were not done playing dirty. They knew they were losing control, and desperate people resort to desperate, chaotic measures. The next morning at exactly 7 o'clock, a loud, aggressive pounding echoed through my house. I was in the kitchen pouring my first cup of coffee. Leo was still asleep upstairs. I walked to the front entryway and checked the security cameras on my tablet. Standing on my front porch was a stern-looking man clutching a thick manila envelope flanked by 2 uniformed police officers. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door. The man did not greet me. He simply shoved the heavy envelope into my hands and stated that I had been officially served by the Family Court of Seattle. I ripped open the envelope and scanned the aggressive legal jargon. My heart hit the floor. Harrison and Catherine had officially filed a massive expedited lawsuit against me for grandparents' rights and severe emotional distress. But that was not the part that made my blood run cold. Attached to the lawsuit was a formal request for an emergency immediate injunction. They were claiming that my house was a toxic, dangerous environment. They alleged that I was mentally unstable and a severe flight risk. They were legally petitioning a judge to have armed authorities forcibly remove Leo from my home and place him in their temporary custody before the end of the day. They were trying to rip my son out of his bed and lock him away in their mansion to ensure he would be forcefully paraded at Preston's charity gala. The legal ambush was ruthless. I had less than 24 hours to defend my entire motherhood in front of a judge, or I was going to lose my son. The emergency injunction meant we had mere hours to prepare. I did not waste a single second panicking. I immediately called my lead corporate defense attorney, the same man who had humiliated my father at the police precinct, and told him to meet me at the family court building. I instructed him to bring every single piece of documentation we had compiled regarding my 17 years of sole financial and emotional responsibility for Leo. My parents thought they could ambush me with a rapid-fire legal maneuver, utilizing the element of surprise to rip my son from his home. They fundamentally underestimated my capacity to mobilize elite legal resources at a moment's notice. I arrived at the courthouse wearing a sharp-tailored navy suit. I walked through the heavy wooden doors of the family court division, with my head held high, flanked by 2 of the most aggressive, highly paid litigators in the city. Harrison and Catherine were already sitting on the wooden benches in the hallway outside the assigned courtroom. They had brought the same sleazy, high-volume intimidation lawyer who had tried to bribe me in my office. When Catherine saw me walking down the corridor, she immediately launched into her performance. She clutched a lace handkerchief to her chest, her face carefully arranged into a mask of profound, devastating grief. Harrison stood tall, puffing out his chest, attempting to project the image of a protective, heartbroken patriarch fighting for his family. They looked absolutely ridiculous, but I knew they were fully prepared to sell this fictional tragedy to the judge. We were called into the courtroom shortly after 9 o'clock. The judge was a stern, uncompromising woman with decades of experience in family law. She looked over her reading glasses at the two legal teams, clearly unhappy to have an emergency injunction thrust onto her busy morning docket. She demanded to know why this case required the immediate forceful removal of a high school senior from his established home. Harrison and Catherine's lawyer stood up first. He launched into an incredibly dramatic, Oscar-worthy opening statement. He painted a tragic, horrifying picture of two loving, devoted grandparents who had been maliciously and systematically alienated from their beloved grandson. He claimed that I suffered from severe emotional instability and was using the boy as a pawn to extract financial leverage from my wealthy family. Catherine took the stand next. She managed to produce actual tears, letting them spill gracefully over her perfectly applied makeup. She testified that she had spent the last 17 years begging for access to Leo. She lied under oath, claiming she had bought him countless birthday presents, funded his secret hobbies, and prayed every single night for the day she could finally hold her grandson again. She told the judge that my house was a toxic, dangerous environment filled with bitter resentment, and that Leo was in imminent psychological danger if he remained in my custody for another 24 hours. Harrison followed her performance with his own brand of arrogant manipulation. He spoke in a deep, booming voice about family values and legacy. He claimed he had a sprawling, safe estate ready to welcome the boy. He insisted that placing Leo in their temporary custody was the only way to ensure the teenager would be properly protected from my supposed erratic, dangerous behavior before he left for college. The judge listened to their theatrical testimonies with a grave expression. For a brief, terrifying moment, I wondered if their performance was actually working. They were incredibly convincing liars practiced in the art of social manipulation and playing the victim. But I did not let my anxiety show. I simply looked at my lead attorney and gave him a single sharp nod. My lawyer stood up. He did not raise his voice. He did not engage in theatrical theatrics. He simply unclasped his heavy leather briefcase and began to systematically, ruthlessly destroy their entire fabricated narrative with cold, hard, undeniable facts. He approached the bench and handed the judge a massive indexed binder of certified documents. He then turned to face Harrison and Catherine, his eyes locking onto them with absolute predatory focus. My lawyer stated clearly that the petitioners, Harrison and Catherine, were committing blatant perjury in an attempt to weaponize the family court system for their own financial gain. He explained that their sudden, desperate interest in the boy was entirely motivated by a generational trust fund payout that required them to produce a compliant heir at a corporate gala this coming weekend. The judge's eyes narrowed sharply at the mention of financial motivation. She opened the heavy binder. My attorney walked the court through the exact contents of that binder. He presented 17 years of comprehensive financial records, proving that I had paid for every single aspect of Leo's life. There was not a single canceled check wire transfer or cash deposit from Harrison or Catherine. They had contributed absolutely $0 to his medical care, his housing, his food, or his education. But financial abandonment was just the beginning of our counterattack. My lawyer moved on to the emotional abandonment. He presented a towering stack of sworn notarized affidavits from people who had actually been present for Leo's entire life. There were sworn statements from every single pediatrician Leo had ever seen since the day he was born. The doctors confirmed that I was the only parent who ever brought him to his appointments, held him during his vaccinations, and sat with him in the emergency room when he broke his arm in the 7th grade. Neither Harrison nor Catherine had ever been listed as emergency contacts. They had never once called a doctor's office to check on his health. My lawyer then presented sworn affidavits from the principals and teachers at Leo's elementary, middle, and high schools. The educators testified that I attended every single parent-teacher conference, every science fair, and every school play. The school records proved that Harrison and Catherine had never once set foot on campus. They had never attended a single graduation, a single sporting event, or a single award ceremony. They were complete strangers to the boy they were now desperately claiming to love. To deliver the final crushing blow, my attorney presented the official certified copy of the sole legal adoption paperwork I had finalized when I was 25 years old. He pointed out that Harrison and Catherine had explicitly signed waivers at the time, enthusiastically relinquishing any and all legal interest in the child, just to ensure their country club reputation remained untarnished by a teenage pregnancy. The silence in the courtroom was absolute and terrifying. The judge stared at the mountain of irrefutable evidence sitting on her bench. The color had completely drained from Harrison's face. Catherine was gripping the edge of the wooden table, her fake tears entirely gone, replaced by genuine panicked dread. Their sleazy lawyer was staring at his shoes, realizing his career was suddenly in jeopardy for bringing such a glaringly fraudulent case before a furious judge. The judge closed the heavy binder. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. She looked down at Harrison and Catherine, and the fury radiating from her was palpable. She did not just throw out the emergency injunction, she verbally decimated them. The judge stated that their blatant attempt to manipulate the court system with fabricated allegations was one of the most disgraceful displays of parental entitlement she had ever witnessed in her entire career. She scolded them for attempting to traumatize a high school senior just days before his graduation party, simply to secure a financial payout from a family trust. The judge formally dismissed their lawsuit with extreme prejudice, meaning they could not simply refile the same bogus claims tomorrow. She then took it a step further, ordering Harrison and Catherine to pay the entirety of my massive legal fees for forcing me to defend myself against their malicious, frivolous lawsuit. She warned them that if they ever attempted to harass me or my son again, she would personally hold them in contempt of court. I walked out of the courtroom feeling a profound, intoxicating sense of victory. We had met their most aggressive, desperate attack head-on and completely shattered it. Leo was entirely safe. But Harrison was a man who refused to accept defeat gracefully. As my lawyers and I walked down the marble corridor toward the exit, Harrison broke away from his own legal counsel and marched aggressively toward me. His face was twisted with bitter, uncontrollable rage. He blocked my path, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. "You think you have won?" Julia Harrison snarled, completely ignoring the fact that my attorneys were standing right next to me. "You think a single courtroom victory changes anything? I have deeper pockets than you can possibly imagine. I will keep filing appeals. I will file civil suits. I will tie you up in litigation for the next 10 years if I have to. I will drain every single penny you have ever earned until you cannot afford to defend yourself anymore. You will surrender that boy to Brittany, or I will ensure you die bankrupt and completely alone." I looked at the pathetic, angry man who used to terrify me when I was a child. I felt absolutely nothing but cold clinical pity for him. He thought his wealth made him a god. He truly believed he could buy my submission. "I will send you the bill for today's legal fees, Harrison," I replied calmly, my voice ringing with steady authority. "I suggest you pay it promptly before your social circle finds out you are bouncing checks." I stepped around him and walked out of the courthouse, leaving him fuming in the hallway. I stepped out into the bright Seattle sunshine, took a deep breath of fresh air, and pulled my cell phone from my purse to check my messages. I had safely protected my son, but the war was far from over. Tomorrow night was the charity gala, and I had a massive public execution to prepare for. As I unlocked my phone screen, a highly urgent notification popped up. It was an encrypted message from the senior director of my commercial property management company. I opened the message and read the contents. A sharp, brilliant smile spread across my face. The management board of the Crestwood Country Club was in a state of absolute frantic panic. The country club directors had just received a formal, legally binding notification from their new anonymous corporate landlord. The notification stated that the landlord was exercising their contractual right to conduct a full, comprehensive site inspection of the entire property. The inspection was not scheduled for next week. It was not scheduled for next month. The anonymous landlord was demanding that the complete site inspection take place tomorrow night, exactly at the same time as Preston's massive high society family charity gala. The country club management was terrified of losing their lease and was practically begging to roll out the red carpet for the mysterious billionaire who now owned the ground beneath their feet. Harrison wanted to threaten my finances in a courthouse hallway. He had no idea I was about to walk through the front doors of his most sacred sanctuary and burn his entire social empire to the ground. I typed a quick reply to my property manager, confirming my attendance, and slid the phone back into my pocket. It was time to get Leo's tuxedo ready. Friday morning arrived with absolute crystalline clarity. There was no room for panic, no space for second-guessing. We operated with the ruthless precision of a corporate merger. After my morning meetings, I took Leo to a master tailor downtown. The tailor had spent the night rushing the alterations on a midnight blue bespoke tuxedo that fit Leo's broad shoulders perfectly. When my son stepped out of the fitting room, adjusting the crisp cuffs of his white shirt, he did not look like a scared teenager. He looked like a confident, highly educated young man ready to conquer the world. He looked exactly like the son I had raised. While Leo was being fitted, I initiated the digital takeover of the Crestwood Country Club. As the newly established anonymous landlord of the massive commercial property, my management company possessed absolute sweeping authority over the building's infrastructure. I had informed the panicked country club directors that my elite inspection team would be evaluating the facility's technical capabilities during the charity gala to ensure their systems were up to code. The club directors, absolutely terrified of losing their prestigious lease, had immediately ordered their entire staff to comply with my team's every demand. My inspection team was not a group of random contractors. I deployed 3 of the top cybersecurity engineers from my own tech firm. They arrived at Crestwood early Saturday afternoon wearing plain black polo shirts and carrying heavy Pelican cases full of equipment. They marched directly into the Grand Ballroom's audiovisual control booth, flashed their property management credentials, and seamlessly took command of the entire digital sound and projection system. I sat in my home office and established a heavily encrypted direct link to my engineers in the booth. I securely transmitted the devastating digital files Nathan had decrypted for me. I sent the offshore banking ledgers, the colorful pie charts showing the stolen $600,000, the Las Vegas casino receipts, and the crystal-clear audio file of Brittany's frantic bribe at the coffee shop. My lead engineer locked the files directly into the gala's main projection queue. We established a simple, undetectable hand signal for Leo to use when he took the stage. The moment Leo tapped the microphone twice, my engineers would hijack the massive ballroom screens and broadcast the undeniable truth to Seattle's elite. As the sun began to set on Saturday evening, the psychological warfare from Brittany escalated to a frantic, unhinged peak. Leo was standing in front of the hallway mirror, carefully tying his black silk bow tie, when his cell phone began to vibrate violently against the console table. It buzzed continuously, a relentless barrage of text messages flooding his lock screen. Brittany was spiraling into pure panic. She knew her massive financial payout rested entirely on the shoulders of the boy she had abandoned. She sent Leo a heavily formatted, color-coded script she expected him to memorize and recite verbatim in front of Preston's billionaire grandfather. She instructed Leo to walk up to the microphone, look directly at her, and call her his guiding light. She demanded he tell the crowd of wealthy socialites that she had tirelessly funded his elite private education from the shadows, making heartbreaking sacrifices just to ensure he succeeded. When Leo did not immediately reply to the script, Brittany's tone shifted from fake maternal warmth to vicious, desperate threats. The messages grew darker and far more aggressive. She texted that if he stuttered, if he went off script, or if he tried to humiliate her, she would completely destroy my life. She threatened to unleash Preston's army of corporate lawyers to bankrupt my design firm. She swore she would fabricate evidence to ensure I never worked in the technology sector again. She told him to take the free Portia read the script and not test her wrath. Leo did not flinch. He did not show a single ounce of fear. He calmly picked up his phone, took high-resolution screenshots of every single unhinged threat, and forwarded them directly to my legal team's secure server. Brittany was just handing us more ammunition for the inevitable extortion charges. Leo typed a cold two-word reply to his biological mother. Message received. He dropped the phone into his jacket pocket and turned to face me, a sharp, confident smile resting on his face. I was wearing a striking architectural emerald green gown that swept the floor, my hair pulled back into a sleek professional chignon. We looked like royalty, completely untouchable. We walked out the front door of our home, ready to step into the sleek town car I had hired for the evening. But as we stepped onto the front porch, the head of my private security detail tapped his earpiece and held up a hand, signaling us to stop. A massive, ostentatious black stretch limousine had just aggressively swerved into my driveway. It parked horizontally, entirely blocking our town car from exiting the property. The rear passenger doors swung open, and Harrison and Catherine stepped out into the cool evening air. They were dressed in their country club best, radiating arrogant entitlement. They had formulated a desperate last-minute plan to completely control the narrative. They intended to physically intercept Leo, force him into their limousine, and parade him into the charity gala under their strict supervision, ensuring I was left abandoned and locked out of the venue. Harrison marched up the driveway, pointing a demanding finger at my son. He barked an order for Leo to get into the limousine immediately, claiming it was time for him to join his real family. Catherine trailed right behind him, reaching out with heavily manicured hands to grab Leo's arm. She cooed with fake saccharine sweetness about how a proud grandmother and her grandson should make a grand entrance together to impress Preston's relatives. I did not even have to raise my voice. I did not have to argue with them or defend my territory. I simply gave a sharp nod to the man standing beside my porch. My private security detail moved with blinding, terrifying speed. 3 massive, highly trained professionals stepped off the porch and formed an impenetrable solid wall of muscle and tactical gear between Harrison and my son. They moved with absolute military precision, entirely blocking Catherine's outstretched hands. The head of my security team stepped squarely into Harrison's personal space, towering over my father. He informed Harrison in a flat, dangerous voice that he was actively trespassing on private property. He stated clearly that Harrison had exactly 10 seconds to move the limousine out of the driveway before the security team physically removed the vehicle and detained him for attempted kidnapping. Harrison puffed out his chest, his face turning a furious, splotchy purple. He tried to bluster and throw his weight around, threatening to have the security guards fired, threatening to call the police, demanding access to his grandson. The security chief did not blink. He simply began counting backward from 10. When he reached 7, 2 of the guards placed their hands firmly on their utility belts, adopting a defensive, uncompromising stance. Faced with actual physical consequences and an unyielding wall of professional force, Harrison's arrogant bravery instantly evaporated. He realized he could not bully his way past trained professionals. Utterly humiliated and shaking with impotent rage, Harrison grabbed Catherine's arm. They were forced to retreat to their ridiculous stretch limousine, slamming the doors behind them. They reversed out of my driveway and sped down the street, fleeing like absolute cowards in front of the entire neighborhood. With the driveway clear, Leo and I stepped into our quiet, secure town car. The drive to the Crestwood Country Club was peaceful. We did not need to review our strategy. We had spent 17 years building the unbreakable trust that was about to bring down a fraudulent empire. We were completely ready. The country club was glowing against the night sky, a beacon of immense wealth and high society privilege. Valets in crisp uniforms rushed to open doors for Seattle's elite, who flowed up the grand marble steps and through the heavy glass double doors. Laughter and the soft sounds of a live string quartet drifted out into the cool evening air. This was Harrison and Catherine's sacred temple, the ultimate stage for their social validation. Leo and I walked up the marble steps, moving with smooth, synchronized confidence. I could see the sparkling chandeliers of the grand lobby through the glass, casting a warm light over the expensive gowns and tailored suits of the arriving guests. We approached the main entrance, ready to step inside and execute our flawless corporate ambush. Suddenly, a man stepped directly into our path. It was the country club's head maitre d', a strict, severe-looking man holding a heavy leather clipboard and wearing a discreet earpiece. He moved with aggressive purpose, physically blocking the center of the double doors, so we could not advance another inch. His face was tense, his posture rigid. He looked incredibly nervous to be causing a scene at the front entrance, but his jaw was set with absolute unquestioning resolve. He held up a white-gloved hand, stopping us right on the marble threshold. He looked directly at me, his eyes darting to the clipboard in his hands. He stated in a loud, firm voice that he was acting on strict, explicit, and non-negotiable instructions from Mrs. Brittany and Mr. Preston. He informed me that I was permanently banned from the premises, and that I would not be permitted entry into the charity gala under any circumstances tonight. He demanded that I turn around and leave the property immediately before he was forced to call the authorities. The line of wealthy guests waiting behind us began to murmur with impatient curiosity. Diamonds sparkled under the portico lights, and the soft rustle of expensive silk filled the crisp evening air. The maitre d' stood his ground, his shoulders squared fully, expecting me to shrink away in embarrassment. He thought he held all the power because he was acting on behalf of Preston, one of the most affluent members of the Crestwood Country Club. He thought I was just an unwelcome intruder, attempting to crash a high society gathering. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue with him or cause the undignified scene my family so desperately hoped for. I simply unclasped my emerald green evening clutch and reached inside. I pulled out my heavy, solid titanium black card, the kind issued only to clients with 8-figure investment portfolios. Tucked perfectly beneath it was a thick, folded piece of premium parchment paper bearing a bright gold notary seal. It was the certified commercial deed to the Crestwood Country Club property. I held both items out, offering them to the severe-looking man. I kept my voice incredibly soft, forcing him to lean in slightly to hear me over the murmuring crowd. "I understand that you received strict instructions from your club members," I said, maintaining absolute unblinking eye contact. "However, as the general manager of this facility, you also received an urgent memorandum this morning from your new commercial property management firm. I strongly suggest you look at the signature on this deed before you decide to threaten your landlord with the authorities." The maitre d' frowned, clearly confused by my calm demeanor. He tentatively took the documents from my hand. He glanced at the titanium black card, his eyebrows rising slightly at the unmistakable weight of the metal. Then he unfolded the commercial deed. His eyes scanned the legal text, dropping down to the bold printed name right next to the gold notary seal. The transformation was instantaneous and absolutely spectacular. All the color violently drained from his face, leaving his skin a pale, sickly shade of gray. His rigid, authoritative posture completely collapsed. He suddenly realized he was not blocking a bitter, unwanted relative. He was actively threatening the anonymous billionaire landlord who held the power to terminate the country club lease and shut down their entire operation with a single phone call. His hands began to shake uncontrollably as he carefully folded the deed and handed it back to me along with my credit card. He bowed his head so low he was practically bending in half. "Ms. Julia," he stammered, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. "I am so incredibly sorry. I had absolutely no idea. Please accept my most profound apologies for this inexcusable misunderstanding. The board of directors has been expecting your inspection team. Please step right this way." He snapped his fingers furiously at the nearby security guards, ordering them to clear the path. He did not just let us through the door. He personally escorted us past the massive line of waiting socialites, leading us through the grand marble lobby and directly into the main ballroom. He bypassed the standard guest tables entirely and guided us up a short flight of carpeted stairs to the elevated platinum VIP tier. It was the most exclusive section in the entire venue, overlooking the massive dance floor and offering a perfect, unobstructed view of the main stage. The manager pulled out a velvet chair for me, signaling a waiter to immediately bring over a bottle of their most expensive sparkling water. He assured me that his staff was entirely at my disposal for the remainder of the evening, and practically tripped over his own feet as he hurried away to alert the board of directors that their new landlord had arrived. Leo sat down next to me, adjusting his bespoke bow tie with a sharp, brilliant smile. We had successfully breached the fortress. Now we just had to wait for the enemy to spot us. We did not have to wait long. Across the sprawling ballroom, my mother was in her absolute element. Catherine was standing near a towering ice sculpture, a crystal flute of champagne in her hand, laughing loudly with a group of extremely wealthy women. She was wearing a blindingly bright silver gown, soaking up the attention and pretending to be the perfect, loving matriarch of a flawless family. She casually glanced up toward the elevated VIP balconies, likely checking to see which prominent billionaires had arrived. Her gaze swept over the velvet chairs and slammed to a dead stop right on my face. The champagne flute slipped directly through Catherine's fingers. It hit the marble floor with a sharp, piercing crash, sending shards of crystal and expensive alcohol flying across the polished tiles. The wealthy women around her gasped, stepping back to avoid the mess. Catherine did not even apologize to them. Her face contorted into a mask of pure primal panic. She left her friends standing in confusion and practically sprinted across the ballroom floor. She hiked up the heavy fabric of her silver gown, rushing up the carpeted stairs to our VIP section. She was breathing heavily by the time she reached our table, her eyes darting around wildly to see if anyone from Preston family had noticed us. "What are you doing here?" Catherine hissed, her voice a toxic, venomous whisper. Her perfectly manicured hands were trembling with rage. "You are going to ruin everything. Get out of this building right now before I have you arrested for trespassing." I took a slow, elegant sip of my sparkling water. "I am just here to enjoy the charity gala, Mother," I replied calmly. "It is a beautiful venue. I am very invested in its continued success." Catherine ignored me completely and lunged toward my son. She reached out and grabbed Leo roughly by the bicep, her sharp fingernails digging into the fabric of his new tuxedo jacket. She tried to physically yank him out of his velvet chair. "You need to come with me right this second, Leo," she demanded, pulling on his arm with desperate, frantic strength. "You need to get downstairs and hide in the catering hallway before Preston grandfather sees you sitting with her. You are ruining the plan. Get up." Leo did not budge. He planted his feet firmly on the ground, his broad shoulders easily resisting her frantic tugging. He reached over and calmly peeled her fingers off his jacket, dropping her hand back to her side as if she were a misbehaving child. "Do not touch me again," Leo said, his voice ringing with cold, hard authority. "I am sitting exactly where I belong." Catherine looked like she was going to have a stroke. She opened her mouth to scream at him, but a heavy, booming voice interrupted her from the bottom of the stairs. "What the hell is going on up here?" Preston marched up the stairs to the VIP tier, looking incredibly irritated by the commotion. He was wearing a sharp, tailored tuxedo, but his face was tight with stress. Right on his heels was Brittany. My sister was sweating profusely, her heavy makeup starting to melt under the heat of her absolute terror. When she saw me sitting comfortably at the platinum table, all the blood drained from her face. She looked like a ghost. Preston stopped at our table, glaring at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. He turned to the club manager, who had rushed back over to ensure his new landlord was not being disturbed. "I gave your staff explicit, non-negotiable instructions that this woman was banned from the premises," Preston barked, jabbing a finger in my direction. "Why is she sitting in the platinum tier? Call your security team and have her physically thrown out into the street immediately." The club manager swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked at Preston, one of his most prominent members, and then looked at me, the billionaire who owned the building. He made the only choice that would save his career. "I am incredibly sorry, sir," the manager stammered, wringing his hands nervously. "But I cannot do that. Ms. Julia is our most esteemed VIP guest this evening. She has absolute, unrestricted access to the entire facility. I must ask you to lower your voice and return to the main floor." Preston stared at this manager as if the man had just spoken to him in an alien language. He was completely baffled. He was a multimillionaire who was used to snapping his fingers and getting exactly what he wanted. He could not comprehend a universe where a country club manager would openly defy his orders to protect a woman he believed was just a struggling middle-class computer nerd. Brittany realized the situation was rapidly spiraling out of her control. She desperately threw herself between Preston and the table, grabbing her husband's arms and spinning a wild, frantic lie to distract him from the truth. "She is insane," Preston, Brittany cried, her voice shrill and panicked. She must have bribed the catering staff to sneak in through the service entrance. You know how dangerous and unstable she is. She is obsessed with me. She just came here to ruin our special night because she is incredibly jealous of our wealth. Please just ignore her. Do not let her ruin the charity event. Let us just go back downstairs. Preston looked at his wife, then looked back at me. He was clearly remembering the seeds of doubt I had planted during our private meeting at the restaurant. He was starting to suspect that Brittany's stories were built on a foundation of massive, unstable lies. But he was trapped in a public venue surrounded by his elite family. He could not risk a massive screaming scene. "You are playing a very dangerous game," Julia Preston growled, leaning over my table. "If you try to pull a single stunt tonight, I will destroy you." I smiled warmly at him, completely unbothered by his aggressive posturing. "You have a big speech to give, Preston. I suggested you go enjoy your perfect party while you still can." Before Preston could formulate a response, the massive crystal chandeliers above the grand ballroom began to slowly dim. The low melodic hum of the live string quartet faded away, replaced by the sharp, clear sound of a microphone feeding back slightly on the main stage. The event coordinator voice echoed through the state-of-the-art surround sound system, asking all guests to direct their attention to the front of the room. Preston glared at me one last time, straightening his bow tie with a harsh tug. He grabbed Brittany's hand and began marching down the stairs toward the main floor. My sister stumbled in her designer heels, looking back at me over her shoulder. She looked like she was about to vomit right there on the carpet. She knew she was walking directly toward the firing squad, but she had absolutely no choice. She forced a radiant, completely fake smile onto her face and followed her husband to the stage. The spotlight hit the center of the ballroom. Preston stepped up to the podium, grabbing the microphone with a practiced, confident grip. He welcomed the massive crowd of high society elites, thanking his billionaire grandfather and the corporate board members for their generous attendance. He took a deep breath and began his grand speech about the immense value of family legacy and unwavering loyalty. He was preparing to raise a glass to his devoted wife and officially present his stepson to the world to unlock his generational fortune. Leo leaned over his shoulder, brushing against mine. He looked at the massive projector screens hanging above the stage. He looked back at me, a calm, victorious light shining in his eyes. He gave me a single sharp nod. We were ready. Preston adjusted the heavy microphone stand, the harsh stage lights catching the gold face of the expensive watch on his wrist. He cleared his throat and looked out over the sea of wealthy investors, elite socialites, and his own billionaire relatives seated at the front tables. He began weaving a masterful, entirely fictional narrative with the practiced ease of a man who believed money could buy reality. He spoke at length about the unbreakable bonds of family, the noble sacrifices required to build a lasting legacy, and the profound honor of welcoming a new generation into the fold. He turned his gaze toward Brittany, who was standing near the edge of the stage. She was dabbing at her perfectly dry eyes with a silk tissue, playing the role of the overwhelmed, devoted mother to absolute perfection. Preston raised his glass and toasted to his wife, calling her his steadfast rock and his greatest inspiration. He then announced that it was time to officially welcome his stepson into their high society world. He smiled broadly and called Leo to the stage. Leo stood up from his velvet chair in the platinum tier. He did not rush. He buttoned his bespoke midnight blue tuxedo jacket with steady, deliberate hands. He walked down the carpeted stairs with the measured, predatory grace of a seasoned corporate executive walking into a hostile boardroom. The crowd applauded politely, expecting a heartwarming display of blended family unity and an emotional reunion. Leo climbed the steps to the main stage, his posture completely relaxed. Preston patted him aggressively on the shoulder, leaning in to whisper a harsh reminder to stick to the script. Preston handed over the microphone, clapped him on the back one last time, and stepped away to stand proudly beside Brittany. Leo gripped the microphone. He looked out at the hundreds of expectant faces turned toward him. He did not reach into his pocket for the color-coded script Brittany had frantically texted him. He did not look at Preston or acknowledge the billionaire grandfather sitting in the front row. Instead, he smiled warmly, a genuine, brilliant expression that instantly charmed the room. He thanked everyone for attending the charity gala and supporting such an important cause. He stated that turning 18 and preparing to leave for university was a monumental transition in a young man's life. He said he could not possibly take the next step without publicly acknowledging the profound, unwavering support that had gotten him to this exact moment. He took a slow breath and let his voice ring with absolute, undeniable clarity. He said he wanted to take this opportunity to thank the woman who actually funded his entire life, the woman who sacrificed everything to raise him with integrity and fierce protection. Leo raised his hand and pointed directly up at the Platinum VIP balcony. He pointed straight at me. The polite applause instantly died. A wave of confused, hushed murmurs swept through the massive ballroom. Preston's billionaire grandfather frowned, leaning forward in his seat with sudden intense scrutiny. The wealthy guests turned their heads trying to follow Leo's gesture, spotting me standing in the elevated tier in my emerald green gown. Down on the stage floor, Brittany's face contorted into a mask of pure terror. The carefully constructed illusion she had spent years building was shattering in real time. She dropped her champagne glass. It shattered against the stage steps, but nobody paid attention to the breaking crystal. She lunged forward, her high heels catching on the carpet as she tried to physically rush the stage to rip the microphone out of Leo's hands. She hissed frantically, demanding that the sound engineer cut the audio feed immediately before her entire life collapsed. Leo saw her coming. He did not back away or flinch. He simply raised his hand and tapped the head of his microphone twice. The sharp, rhythmic thumps echoed loudly through the ballroom. It was the exact undetectable signal my cybersecurity engineers were waiting for inside the audiovisual control booth. The event coordinator desperately tried to trigger the heartwarming slideshow of fake family photos Brittany had prepared for the presentation. My engineers blocked the command entirely, locking the venue staff out of their own network. The massive high-definition projector screens hanging above the stage went completely black for one agonizing second. Then they flared back to life with blinding, undeniable intensity. The screens did not display baby photos or graduation portraits. They illuminated a massive, highly detailed, and incredibly colorful financial pie chart. The bold, glaring headline across the top of the screen read, "Where the $600,000 Leo Education Fund actually went." The chart was meticulously broken down into specific, undeniable categories. A massive red slice accounted for offshore casino transfers. A bright blue slice highlighted wire payments to luxury designer boutiques in Milan. A green slice represented extravagant stays at international wellness resorts. At the very bottom of the screen, highlighted in a stark contrasting yellow box, was the amount actually spent on Leo's education. The number displayed was $0. The entire ballroom erupted into loud, scandalized gasps. The polite high society gathering instantly transformed into a chaotic frenzy of shocked whispers and pointing fingers. Wealthy investors pulled out their phones, snapping photos of the massive financial breakdown before anyone could take it down. Preston stared up at the giant screens in absolute paralyzing horror. The color violently drained from his face as the undeniable reality washed over him in a suffocating wave. The offshore routing numbers displayed on the screen perfectly matched the suspicious discrepancies his personal accountants had flagged just days ago. The truth hit him like a physical blow. He slowly turned his head to look at his wife. The look of pure, unadulterated disgust and betrayal in his eyes was devastating. He finally understood that he had been systematically conned by the woman he married, used as a personal bank account to fund her secret, reckless addictions. Up in the VIP tier, I stood up from my table. One of my tech engineers slipped out of the shadows and handed me a secondary wireless microphone that was synced directly to the main sound system. I walked to the edge of the balcony, looking down at the chaotic sea of wealthy elites, and turned their exclusive charity gala into a brutal, unrelenting forensic accounting presentation. I spoke clearly and calmly, my voice booming from the surround sound speakers echoing across the grand ballroom and drowning out the frantic murmurs of the crowd. I introduced myself as the anonymous commercial landlord of the Crestwood Country Club and the sole legal guardian of the boy on stage. I methodically walked the stunned crowd through the intricate embezzlement scheme. I detailed exactly how the education fund had been used as a fraudulent shell account. I cited the specific dates, the exact wire transfer amounts, and the offshore casino routing numbers that proved Brittany had been using her abandoned son as a financial shield to siphon $500,000 from her husband's personal wealth. Down on the main floor, my father Harrison realized his entire social empire was burning to the ground right in front of his most important peers. He could not stand the public humiliation. He shoved his way to the center of the room, his face a violent shade of purple. He waved his arms, frantically screaming at the top of his lungs in a desperate bid to regain control of the narrative. He shouted that the presentation was a malicious, fabricated lie. He yelled to his wealthy friends that the data on the screen was a deep fake, a highly sophisticated digital manipulation created by a jealous, bitter woman trying to destroy his family's pristine reputation. He demanded that the country club's security team immediately arrest me for digital terrorism and slander. The crowd murmured again, the sheer scale of the drama causing massive confusion. Some of Harrison's oldest golfing buddies looked uncertain, whispering to each other, wondering if such an elaborate digital hoax was actually possible. Harrison was banking on his decades of country club credibility to save him from the undeniable truth projected above his head. I did not bother arguing with a desperate cornered man. I did not raise my voice or defend my data. I simply looked down at the stage and met Leo's eyes. I gave him a single sharp nod. Leo tapped his microphone twice. The massive projector screens faded to black, replacing the colorful pie chart with a single audio waveform graphic. My engineers in the booth cut the background ambient music, entirely plunging the ballroom into a tense, heavy silence. The only sound in the room was the collective holding of breath from hundreds of guests. Then the crystal-clear, undeniably authentic audio recording of Brittany's frantic bribe at the local coffee shop blasted over the state-of-the-art surround sound system. Brittany's shrill, panicked voice echoed off the high ceilings, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers and ringing in the ears of every single billionaire and socialite in the room. I do not care about the last 17 years, Leo. Just read the script at the gala, so Preston family releases the trust money. I will let you keep the car. Just do not ruin my payout. The audio file played a second time, repeating the damning extortionate threat, just to ensure absolutely no one in the room could misinterpret the malicious intent. The brutal, undeniable sound of her own voice stripping away her maternal facade and exposing her raw, calculated greed echoed into silence. The recording proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that her entire presence at this gala was a mercenary scheme to unlock a generational fortune. Brittany's knees buckled. Her designer heels gave out beneath her as the last shred of her dignity evaporated. She collapsed entirely, dropping to the floor of the ballroom right in front of the stage. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as the reality of her total, inescapable ruin crashed down upon her. She was surrounded by the wealthiest, most powerful people in the city, and every single one of them was looking at her with absolute unmasked contempt. The sheer volume of the gasps in the ballroom sounded like all the oxygen had been violently sucked out of the massive space. Preston did not rush to his wife's side to offer comfort. He did not kneel beside her trembling, crumpled form on the floor. He stepped entirely around her, as if she were a piece of discarded toxic trash ruining the aesthetic of his luxury event. He marched up the brief flight of carpeted stairs to the stage, his face an unreadable mask of absolute terrifying corporate calculation. He approached Leo with a heavy, purposeful stride. He did not yell or cause a scene. He simply extended his hand. Leo calmly handed over the microphone and stepped back, yielding the floor to a man whose entire reality had just been violently shattered. Preston turned to face the crowd of his elite peers, his billionaire grandfather sitting in the front row, and his extremely wealthy board of directors. He cleared his throat, the sound echoing sharply over the state-of-the-art sound system. He announced with zero hesitation, and a voice devoid of any warmth that his marriage to Brittany was completely and irrevocably over. He stated directly into the microphone that his legal team was currently executing an emergency immediate freeze on every single joint bank account credit line and offshore holding bearing his wife's name. Furthermore, he informed the shocked ballroom that he would be pressing immediate felony embezzlement charges against her. He declared to the high society crowd that she would not see another single dime of his family's generational wealth and would be facing severe federal prison time for defrauding his estate. He dropped the microphone onto the stage floor. It hit the polished wood with a loud, definitive thud that signaled the absolute end of Brittany's luxurious empire. Down on the main floor, my parents were drowning in a sea of absolute social ruin. Harrison and Catherine frantically darted between tables of their wealthiest country club friends, desperately attempting to stop the bleeding. Catherine was practically hyperventilating, grabbing at the silk sleeves of women she had played tennis with for a decade. She frantically tried to spin the undeniable evidence, crying that I was a vindictive, jealous mastermind who had manipulated the audio files out of pure spite. Harrison puffed out his chest, attempting to use his usual booming, arrogant authority to laugh the entire situation off as a tasteless, highly dramatic prank designed to test their family loyalty. The reaction from Seattle's elite was brutally, suffocatingly silent. The society women physically pulled their arms away from Catherine's desperate grasp, their faces twisted in profound, unmasked disgust. Harrison's longtime golfing buddies literally turned their backs on him, refusing to even make eye contact or acknowledge his presence. The billionaire grandfather in the front row signaled his personal security detail, pointing a shaking, furious finger directly at my parents, demanding their immediate removal from his sight. I stood tall in the elevated VIP balcony and looked down at the club manager. The man was already sweating profusely, waiting in terror for my ultimate command. I gave him a single definitive nod. The manager snapped his fingers with aggressive urgency. A dozen uniformed Crestwood Country Club security guards descended upon Harrison and Catherine. The guards did not ask them politely to leave. They surrounded my parents, grabbed them firmly by the arms, and physically marched them across the expansive grand ballroom. Catherine shrieked in absolute mortification as she was dragged past her judgmental peers, her silver gown tangling around her ankles. Harrison sputtered hollow, pathetic threats about suing the club and ruining the manager's career, but his weak words were entirely drowned out by the harsh reality of his permanent, highly public exile. I watched the heavy glass doors of their sacred social temple slam shut behind them forever. Preston had already signaled his own private security team to remove Brittany from the ballroom floor. She was unceremoniously escorted out the side service doors, sobbing hysterically, completely stripped of her designer dignity and her billionaire husband. Leo and I did not rush to follow them. We casually walked over to the expansive floor-to-ceiling windows in the VIP lounge that overlooked the Grand Valet parking circle. We looked down at the brilliantly lit driveway to watch the final act of their destruction. The scene unfolding on the pavement below was the ultimate satisfying collapse of a deeply toxic empire. Brittany was standing under the cold concrete portico, shivering in the crisp night air without her luxury coat. When Harrison and Catherine were forcefully shoved out the front doors by the club guards, Brittany did not run to them for comfort or maternal support. The beloved golden child violently turned on her lifelong enablers. Even through the thick, soundproof glass of the ballroom windows, I could see the sheer, unhinged ferocity of her screaming match. Brittany pointed a furious, trembling finger directly at Catherine's face. She blamed her parents for absolutely everything. She screamed that none of this devastating humiliation would have happened if they had not forced her to hide her teenage pregnancy, ordered her to give away her baby, and ruined her life just to protect their precious superficial country club reputation. She shrieked that they had forced her to live a massive, suffocating lie, pushed her into marrying for money instead of actual love, and deliberately created the very monster that had just destroyed her entire existence. Harrison tried to grab her shoulders to quiet her down, absolutely terrified that the valet staff and lingering guests were watching their family implode. Brittany shoved him away with violent, unpredictable force. She grabbed the ruined hem of her expensive designer gown and stormed off into the dark, expansive parking lot, completely alone. She had no wealthy husband, no access to money, no luxury car, and no family left to manipulate. The people who had enabled her worst behavior for her entire life were now the very targets of her absolute, unrestrained hatred. Leo and I did not stay for the rest of the chaotic gala. We walked down the grand marble staircase together, completely untouched by the utter devastation we had left in our wake. The valet brought my hired town car around to the front, and we drove back to our quiet, highly secure home in the suburbs. The car ride was profoundly peaceful. We did not need to celebrate loudly or gloat about our victory. The profound, overwhelming sense of absolute, undeniable justice was more than enough to fill the silence. I slept more soundly that night than I had in 17 years. The massive, suffocating weight of my family's constant manipulation had finally been completely and permanently lifted off my shoulders. I woke up the next morning to the bright, cheerful Seattle sunshine streaming warmly through my bedroom window. I felt entirely renewed, as if I had shed a heavy suit of armor I no longer needed to wear. I was standing in my spacious kitchen, pouring a fresh cup of dark roast coffee and preparing to make Leo a massive celebratory graduation breakfast when a sudden, frantic pounding echoed through the house. The aggressive banging against my heavy oak front door was completely unhinged. It was not the polite knock of a weekend delivery driver. It was the desperate, rhythmic, terrifying smashing of someone who had absolutely nowhere else in the world to go. I set my coffee mug down on the granite counter. I walked calmly to the front entryway and pulled up the live feed from my exterior security cameras on my digital tablet. I stared at the high-definition screen, a cold, victorious smile spreading across my face. Standing on my front porch were Harrison and Catherine. Their immaculate, polished country club appearance was entirely devastatingly gone. Harrison's expensive dress shirt was untucked, stained, and deeply wrinkled. Catherine's heavy makeup was smeared down her cheeks in dark, chaotic, pathetic streaks. They looked absolutely destroyed. They were entirely cut off from Preston's vast generational wealth, permanently exiled from their elite social circles, and facing complete, undeniable financial and social ruin. The people who had once threatened to bankrupt me and steal my son were now begging on my doorstep, waiting for the exact daughter they had discarded to decide their ultimate fate. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the heavy oak door open. Harrison and Catherine practically fell forward, their faces twisted in absolute pathetic desperation. The arrogant sneers they had worn in my corporate office just days ago were completely gone, replaced by the hollow, frantic expressions of people who had just watched their entire universe collapse. Harrison opened his mouth, a barrage of frantic, stuttering apologies spilling out into the crisp morning air. He begged me to let them inside, claiming the local news vans were parked at the entrance of their gated community, and they had absolutely nowhere else to hide from the media fallout. Catherine reached out with trembling hands, sobbing uncontrollably about how Preston had completely cut them off, how the country club board of directors had issued them a lifetime ban via email, and how they were utterly, irreparably financially ruined. They demanded my help entirely, forgetting that they had threatened to bankrupt me, ruin my career, and steal my son less than 48 hours prior. I did not raise my voice. I did not gloat, scream, or invite them into my sanctuary. I simply reached into the pocket of my tailored trousers and pulled out a crisp, heavy manila envelope. I had prepared this specific document months ago, quietly holding on to it for the exact moment they finally crossed the point of no return. I held the envelope out over the threshold. Harrison snatched it greedily, clearly, thinking it was a massive cashier's check or a legal lifeline to save them from their impending doom. He ripped open the seal and pulled out the thick stack of premium watermarked paper. His frantic expression morphed into sheer, unadulterated confusion as his eyes scanned the top page. It was an invoice. It was a meticulously detailed, legally formatted, and completely itemized bill. I watched the remaining blood drain from his face as he flipped through the pages with shaking hands. I had enlisted my forensic accountant to calculate the exact undeniable cost of raising a child in an upper-middle-class household over 17 years. The invoice included every single grocery bill, every private school tuition payment, the cost of medical insurance, dental braces, soccer cleats, summer camps, and college application fees. I even factored in a highly competitive hourly rate for the emotional labor, the missed career opportunities in my 20s, and the round-the-clock care I had provided since I was 18 years old. I added compound interest for the exact duration of their abandonment. The grand total, printed in bold black ink at the bottom of the final page, was over $1.2 million. I looked my father dead in the eye and spoke with absolute terrifying calm. "You came to my house demanding the financial respect owed to a parent. There is the bill for the services you forced me to provide when you abandoned your grandson to protect your superficial social standing. You have 30 days to remit payment in full before I send this to an aggressive debt collection agency." Harrison opened his mouth to argue, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. Catherine let out a horrified gasp, staring at the massive number printed on the paper as her knees buckled slightly. I did not wait for their pathetic excuses. I stepped back inside my quiet, secure home and closed the heavy oak door directly in their faces. I engaged the deadbolt with a loud, satisfying click. I walked back to my kitchen counter, picked up my fresh cup of dark roast coffee, and watched my security tablet as my parents slowly trudged back to their car, utterly defeated and entirely broken. The subsequent weeks delivered a masterclass in total, inescapable corporate and legal destruction. Preston was a ruthless billionaire who did not take lightly to being publicly humiliated and systematically defrauded by the people he had trusted. His army of elite forensic accountants ripped through Brittany's entire financial history with devastating precision. They did not just find the offshore casinos and the luxury boutiques. They found the digital paper trail connecting Brittany's stolen funds directly to Harrison and Catherine. For years, Brittany had been funneling small, untraceable portions of the embezzled money to our parents under the guise of generous holiday gifts and luxury vacations, effectively making them complicit accessories to massive corporate fraud. Preston handed that entire mountain of financial evidence directly over to the Internal Revenue Service. The federal audit was swift, brutal, and entirely merciless. The IRS immediately froze every single asset Harrison and Catherine possessed, pending a massive criminal investigation into tax evasion and receiving stolen funds. Their sprawling, heavily mortgaged luxury estate was seized and quickly put up for public auction to cover the massive federal tax penalties and the staggering legal fees they accumulated trying to defend themselves against Preston's wrath. The very country club friends they had spent decades trying to impress gleefully attended the estate auction, buying my mother's prized antique furniture and my father's expensive golf carts for pennies on the dollar. Harrison and Catherine were forced to move into a tiny, cramped rental apartment in an industrial city 2 hours away, permanently exiled from the high society world they had worshipped above their own flesh and blood. Brittany faced an even darker, much more permanent reality. Preston's legal team successfully pressed charges for grand larceny and felony wire fraud. She was forced to surrender every designer handbag, every piece of jewelry, and every luxury vehicle she had ever purchased just to pay back a tiny fraction of what she stole. Facing the terrifying prospect of a lengthy federal prison sentence, she accepted a brutal plea deal that left her with a permanent felony record and absolute crushing financial debt. The beloved golden child was forced to move into a rundown, heavily dilapidated studio apartment on the grimiest edge of the city. She had no billionaire husband, no wealthy parents to bail her out, and absolutely zero friends willing to associate with a convicted embezzler. She was completely isolated, left entirely alone to face the grim, suffocating reality of her own toxic choices. As the chaotic ashes of my biological family settled into permanent ruin, the atmosphere inside my home shifted into a state of profound, unshakable peace. The oppressive, lingering threat of their interference was completely gone. We spent the rest of the summer enjoying our lives free from the anxiety of secret plots or public smear campaigns. I watched Leo thrive. He spent his days working at his tech repair job, laughing freely with his friends, and preparing for the massive collegiate transition ahead of him. There was no anger left in my heart, no lingering bitterness about the heavy sacrifices I had made in my 20s. I had protected my son, built a massive corporate empire, and secured our future entirely on my own terms. Late August arrived with a crisp, refreshing breeze, signaling the inevitable end of summer and the beginning of Leo's journey to university. We spent a sunny Saturday morning carrying cardboard boxes out to the driveway. We loaded up the sleek, safe SUV I had purchased for him as a high school graduation gift. We packed the trunk with brand new dorm room essentials, a high-powered laptop for his computer science classes, and a massive box of his favorite snacks that I had spent the week carefully curating. I stood in the driveway holding a cup of coffee, feeling a massive wave of overwhelming emotion wash over me. The tiny, fragile baby I had brought home to my cramped, freezing apartment was now a towering, brilliant young man ready to take on the world at one of the best universities in the country. I had done it. Against every odd, against the vicious sabotage of my own parents, I had successfully raised an incredible human being. Leo closed the heavy trunk of the SUV and walked over to me. He looked down, a warm, bright smile spreading across his handsome face. He did not say a word at first. He simply reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a crisp manila envelope. He handed it to me, his eyes shining with unspeakable pride and profound love. I set my coffee mug down on the hood of the car and carefully opened the flap. Inside the envelope was a stack of heavily stamped official legal documents from the state courthouse. I read the top page, my breath catching sharply in my throat. It was a certified decree of a legal name change. Leo had gone to the courthouse the moment he turned 18. He had officially and permanently dropped the biological surname of the family that had abandoned him. The name printed in bold black ink at the bottom of the legal decree was my exact last name. He had legally taken my surname. He had chosen me completely and undeniably, validating every single second of the 17 years we had spent building our lives together. Tears of absolute, overwhelming joy spilled over my eyelashes. I did not try to stop them. I threw my arms around my son, holding him in a fierce, unbreakable embrace. He hugged me back just as tightly, resting his chin on the top of my head, anchoring me in the most beautiful moment of my entire life. "Thank you for being my real mom," he whispered softly, his voice thick with genuine emotion. "Thank you for choosing me every single day when you did not have to." I kissed his cheek, stepping back to look at the incredible man standing in front of me. "You were the best choice I ever made," I replied, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. I wiped my tears, smiling brighter than I ever had in my entire life. Leo climbed into the driver's seat of his packed SUV. He rolled down the window, gave me one last brilliant smile, and pulled out of the driveway. I stood in the warm summer sun and watched the car disappear down the tree-lined street, carrying my son toward a beautiful, limitless future, leaving the toxic ashes of our past permanently behind us. Looking back at the ashes of my biological family and their fallen empire, the greatest lesson I learned was never about money or corporate strategy. It was about the profound difference between a bloodline and a true family. Society conditions us to believe that sharing genetic material means we must endure endless manipulation. We are taught to forgive the unforgivable simply because the people hurting us happen to share our last name. My journey taught me that biology is nothing more than a footnote. True family is forged in the trenches of everyday life. It is defined by who stays awake with you during the feverish nights, who sacrifices their own comfort to ensure your safety, and who champions your success without secretly plotting your downfall. I spent my early 20s exhausted and terrified, but choosing to raise Leo was the single greatest decision of my existence. I did not just save him, because the truth is, we saved each other. We built an unbreakable bond rooted in mutual respect, radical honesty, and unconditional love, which are things my parents and sister could never comprehend. You hold the absolute power to write your own narrative, Do not let anyone weaponize guilt against you. Setting firm boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. When you strip away the illusions and refuse to participate in toxic games, you create space for genuine connections to thrive. If you have ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your peace or shield someone you love, I want to hear from you. Tell me how you found the courage to build your own chosen family in the comments section. Please subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your power and defining your own happiness.